Welcome everybody to the 24th version of the Symposium on Precision Agriculture Research and Application in Australasia. My name is Brett Whelan. I'm from the Precision Ag Lab, which runs out of the Sydney Institute of Agriculture at the University of Sydney. So you have seen the program. We're going to have a diverse range of presenters today, as we always try to do, cover the broad spectrum of what's going on in precision agriculture. I will just throw over now to Frank Demden, who's the president of SPAA, to welcome you all.
Thanks, Brett. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. So on behalf of SPAA, I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's symposium, which we're presenting in conjunction with the University of Sydney's Precision Ag Laboratory. So while it is unfortunate we can't meet face-to-face today, it's still very exciting and important to meet virtually and share the latest in precision ag research and development, and to hear from Australian farmers about their experiences in precision ag and how they're using data in the paddock to make decisions. So before the speaker presentations get underway, I'd like to take a moment to recognise and thank Brett once again for bringing together an impressive and varied group of speakers for this year's program. Well done, Brett, and thank you. It's very disappointing that we're not meeting in person, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you all again, hopefully next year at the symposium. So I'm sure everyone listening now is mentally applauding and endorsing my thanks. And so to be remiss of me also not to mention and thank our wonderful sponsors. So our silver sponsors, Case IH and John Deere, and our bronze sponsors, Manutech, Fosin Analytical, and Zomatic by Lindsay. And thank you all so very much for your support of both SPAA and this important symposium. Speaking of symposium, we've got an exciting afternoon ahead of us. So with one last thing, shout out to Wendy Weston, our new executive officer. Wendy joined us earlier this year and has stepped into the role with aplomb and who's really taken it on with gusto, and she's doing great work. So without any further speechifying, I'll hand back to you, Brett, so we can get the presentations underway. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Frank. Yes, it's been a great collaboration over the years between the two groups. It's wonderful, and yes, it's very much a shame, Frank, that we can't be meeting, because the big part of this is the networking and also the ability to see all the products at the showcase of companies as well. So we missed that in this setting, unfortunately, but we'll plow on, and so it's got, as Frank said, there's a very diverse range of things we're going to see today, which is great. So to keep us going, and so we're going to try and stick to time here, we're going to have a break around about 2:35 for a cup of tea, quick cup of tea. And for the participants, we're going to use the Q&A part of this, so you should be able to access the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. And if you pop some questions in there, and I'm hoping that you can also uptick questions if you really like them and get them pushed to the top as well. So we'll work through that, and we'll try and, if there's room as the presentations are going ahead, we will pose questions to the presenters. If they use most of their time, they can answer them online as we're going along. So I think without further ado, we might move on. We've got Dana there, Dana Campbell, fantastic. Dana's a senior research scientist from Food and Agriculture in Cairo. And she's going to speak to us up in Armidale, is that right, Dana? I think, yeah.
Yes.
So she's going to speak to us about virtual fencing for cattle, understanding the applications and the animal impact. So Dana, if you can share your screen, that'd be great, thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to talk today. As introduced, this is virtual fencing research for cattle, and this is about the understanding the applications of this technology and whether it has any impacts on the animals. So this is work that has been done at CSIRO up in Armidale. There's a group of us that have been working on this, and a lot of the research is part of a larger project that was funded by the Australian government. And so there were multiple research organizations and contributing partners. You can see the list of them all at the bottom of the slide there. So I'll start off with the definition of virtual fencing for those of you that are not familiar with the technology. So virtual fencing is the ability to contain and move cattle without the use of a fixed physical fence. And this is done by communicating signals to the animals. In the case of the technology we use, it's an audio tone and an electrical stimulus. And this is via a neckband device that the animals wear. And so these animals, they learn to avoid a virtual boundary based on this audio tone alone. So they learn to pair the audio with the electrical, and then they just start responding to the audio tone alone. So they can stay within the area, and they can also avoid getting an electric shock once they have learned. And as you might imagine, there are multiple applications of using this technology. You can have greater control of your animals within the paddocks. The animals are all monitored by GPS, so you've got greater awareness and monitoring of where your animals are. And you can protect areas that might otherwise be difficult to fence. But virtual fencing technology is aimed at internal fencing, so it wouldn't replace a hard fence next to a highway. It's just supposed to increase your ability to monitor and move the animals within the internal fencing. And so just an illustration of how the system works. Here is a schematic of a paddock. And so you have this dashed line, which is your virtual fence line, and this separates two zones, the inclusion zone where you'd want the animals to be and the exclusion zone that you're trying to keep them out of. When they are in this inclusion zone, the animals don't receive any signals at all. Once they start approaching this boundary, they will get this audio warning tone, and this is followed by an electrical pulse. If the animal actually moves through the boundary, then they still continue to get these signals. So as they move deeper and deeper into the exclusion zone, they still get audio and electrical signals. However, if the animal turns around to move back out and go the direction that you want them to go, then they no longer get any signals. So in this way, the system acts to shepherd them back if they go into the exclusion zone. And so the commercial product that we've been working with, this is a product developed from CSIRO IP, but it's been commercialized by a startup company, Adjacents. They purchased the IP approximately 5 or 6 years ago, and they've recently been bought by Gallagher Electric Fencing. And so we have been working with this product, but they are the ones that have been developing it. So the eShepherd system, the cattle, they wear a neckband device that is connected to GPS. And you have a base station set up on the farm, and the base station is able to communicate with these neckband devices, but also communicates through a cloud database. And then everything connects to your smartphone, your tablet, your computer. So you're able to monitor the animals, control them, set fences through your device. So you can do that remotely. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the virtual fencing research that we've done over the last few years, this was part of a larger scale project that was funded by the Australian government. And you can see that there were multiple research partners involved in this. And the work that we did with the group in CSIRO up here in Armidale, it was to understand how the animals respond to this technology, specifically in beef cattle, looking at the on-farm applications of the technology and whether there are any welfare impacts on the animals. And there is a full report of all the research that was done over the last few years by all the institutions involved. You can access this at the link that I've put on the screen below here. And so given that this is just a short presentation today, I was just going to give a summary of some of the work that we have done, just present some of the results in brief. As I said, for anyone wanting to get more details, there is that full report, and there are also publications available of the studies that I am presenting today if you wanted more details. So one of the first on-farm trials that we did was at a riparian zone in New South Wales. This was a commercial farm. We just had a small group of 11 cattle, and this was done a couple of years ago, and we were wanting to test whether technology was able to exclude them from a river area that the animals otherwise were motivated to access. And so the black lines on the map here, this was all the available area that the animals could go. You can obviously see the river indicated there. So we gave them access to the whole area initially, and then we set up this orange dashed line as a virtual fence that blocked off the river area, and they were just contained within this yellow outlined, and then the dashed line in front there. They were contained in that small area for approximately 10 days. And then we deactivated the fence to see if they would go back across the river once we had removed that fence. And so these are the GPS plots of the animal movement. So you can see initially for a week when they had access, there's no virtual fence, they had access to the whole area. You can see that they would move across the river and to the paddocks beyond. We then activated a virtual fence for 10 days, and you can see that the animals were contained within this area. You can see these tracks here. So there were a group of 4 animals that crossed over 3 days into the trial. So they crossed over for about 30 minutes, but the system was able to turn them around and send them back the way I described earlier, where as the animals cross over the boundary, they still keep getting signals. And the only way those signals stop is if the animals turn around to go back to where they're meant to go. And then when we turn the fence off, the animals within a couple of hours went right back down, and they accessed this whole area again. So the fence was just temporary. So we could see that these animals, they were able to be excluded from this area just on a temporary basis. The system was able to shepherd them back when they crossed. You can see that once the fence was removed, the animals were quick to access the area again. And if anyone was interested in full details of the study, there is a publication available open access online. And then another on-farm study we did, and this was in collaboration with Rick Llewellyn's group down in South Australia, the CSIRO group down there. And this was looking at whether the virtual fencing system would work to exclude animals from an area of regenerating saplings. So this was a commercial farm down in South Australia. We had a slightly larger group of cattle. This was 20 cattle, this one. And we were also testing a different shape fence line. So in the previous slide, with previous trial that I showed, and a lot of other trials that we had done prior that I have not presented here, we always had a straight fence line because this was originally all the system could do. And then it was also believed to be simplest for the cattle. But obviously, if you're doing difficult terrain or more complex areas, then a straight fence line may not always be the best. And so with this, we wanted to test a line that was able to follow around the sapling area. So it's a contoured line. And so to do this, we had a series of fence lines activated. So we started off with something straight, and then we gradually progressed to this final, the red line, which is contoured around that hashed shaded sapling area. And this trial was run for 7 weeks. You can see here, these are the GPS plots of the animal movement and time. You can see that with the straight line, they were able to be excluded, but they were also able to be excluded as this line became more contoured. You can see that there were periods where the animals crossed over, particularly in this week 6. But these animals were removed, and we determined that the prototypes of the devices that they were wearing at the time had a malfunction in them. So the design of the devices has since been redone to avoid having this type of malfunction that it did. And once we removed, and so with the malfunction, it meant that the animals were properly receiving the electrical pulse. So essentially the devices weren't able to keep them out because they were no longer getting those pulses. And you can see with those animals removed in week 7, all the animals where the devices were working properly, they did remain within the area that they were meant to. And so with this, we could see that animals, they were able to be kept from this environmentally sensitive area on a commercial property, and they were also able to learn this contoured fence line successfully. And anyone that is wanting more details of this study, there is, again, an open access publication available online from this. And then the final study that I'll talk about today, this is where we wanted to compare using a virtual fence versus electric tape. So virtual fencing itself is not yet permitted in all states within Australia, and there are certainly concerns from certain groups or legislative bodies as to whether if we make this virtual fencing technology legal, then are there going to be any impacts on the animals from using this new type of technology? So with this study, we wanted to compare using this virtual fence to a standard electric tape fence that is used regularly on farms. And so for this, we had a setup of 8 different paddocks, and we were comparing setting up virtual fence line or setting up an electric tape line. And we had 8 groups of 8 animals each, but they were run across 2 cohorts, so that we started with just 4 groups, run for 4 weeks, and then we set up another 4 groups, run for 4 weeks. And across this time, we took a range of different measurements on the animals. So we looked at GPS patterns of whether they were staying within the lines, or staying in the inclusion zones. We looked at the signals that they were getting across time. We had ice cubes on their legs, which are devices that automatically track behavioral profiles for standing, lying, walking behavior. And then we also collected fecal samples to look at stress hormone metabolites in those. And so just briefly, some of the results from this trial. So this is showing behavioral profiles across the trial duration. So on top, these are the animals that had the electric tape, and on bottom, these are the animals that had the virtual fence. And this is showing across a day the number of hours that they spent standing, number of hours they spent lying, where if you got a reduced time spent lying from normal, then that would indicate that there could be concerns for that animal's welfare. And so we can see here that although the profiles, they changed across time, and they also varied across the different cohorts that we use, the different groups. When you compare between the tape and the virtual, they did have similar patterns. Statistically, the virtual fence animals exhibited less lying behavior, but it equated to approximately 10 to 15 minutes per day that they were lying less. So whether that has any biological relevance, we're not sure. It didn't appear to impact them negatively based on other measures we took. But that might be something that you need to really study at longer term to be able to determine if that small difference does have any implications across a longer period of time. And these are the results of the fecal cortisol metabolites, so the stress hormone metabolites. And this is showing, so you've got the tape, the electric tape groups on top, and the virtual fence groups down the bottom. And this is across the different weeks of the trial. And so you can see for all animals, the stress hormone metabolites, they decreased across time, which sort of fitted with the temperament or the behavior of the animals that we're seeing. These were animals that were brought in new from a commercial property, and they adjusted across time. You can see that they calmed down a lot across time. So these stress hormone metabolites fit with that pattern, but we did not see any differences between the electric tape and the virtual fence groups. And so in conclusion with this, we found that there were minimal differences between using this electric tape fencing and virtual fencing within these paddocks. And there is a full write-up of this research, including the other measures that we took, if anyone is interested in learning more about it. And so overall, what we know from the work that we've done, both what I've presented here and some of the other work that I did not have time to present, is that the technology, it does work across different situations that we've tried so far. So it is able to exclude animals from a water area or from environmentally sensitive area. We have not found major welfare impacts of the virtual fencing technology to date. And I didn't present results on this, but I just wanted to mention this here, that in every trial that we've done, we found that there is very high individual variation in responses of the animals. So individual variation in how quickly they learn that, that the audio tone means an electrical pulse is coming, and they learn to stop at the audio tone. So how quickly they learn that. And then also how often they go to the fence, so how many signals they may get across the trial in total. With every group, we found there is consistently variation between the individuals and the group. And so future work for this is that we really need longer term trials, so 6 months or more, just to be sure that there is no long-term effect that we haven't yet picked up on running these shorter term trials. And then also trying across different breeds of cattle to see if you've got any differences depending on the temperament of the breed. And then certainly trying the technology's application in a more challenging terrain. And just overall, the more studies we can do, then we just have a greater understanding of how this technology works and whether it has any negative impacts on the animal, which is really important before it is rolled out on commercial farms across Australia. And thank you for that. And if I have time left, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Dana, if you want to just quickly answer this for the first one here, what are the per animal costs of these equipment there?
Yes, I can answer that somewhat, but that really is probably best at Edison's, who are selling the project, or Edison's Gallagher now. So I think the last estimate, say around 300 to 350 per device, I believe. And then you would have a cost of setting up the base station on the farm, or multiple base stations if you've got a large property, and then annual subscription costs for those.
Okay. But we better keep moving. Thank you very much, Dana. So there's a couple of questions there if you want to answer them online for us. And then if you're happy to stay around, we'll have some questions at the end as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, next up, we're going to look at, we're going to go beyond the paddock to determine within field variability in crop phenology, soil moisture and crop yield across both space and time, with Andres Potgieter for us from the Queensland Alliance for Agricultural and Food Innovation at the University of Queensland, and he's a principal research fellow there. Andres, that'd be great.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone, also for the opportunity to give this presentation here this afternoon. In my talk this afternoon, I'll just briefly touch on a few things, talking about crop production, looking at crop production and variability, decision making at a farm, in agriculture, mixed cropping systems then and now, the application of digital technologies at a sub-paddock level. Specifically, I'll be sharing some examples of our work in yield prediction, phenology, some new work on soil moisture, and also cropping intensity. Then also just look at actionable knowledge, how these technologies can be used then to go from data to information to actionable knowledge, and then go into challenges and also beyond the paddock in artificial intelligence. Climate is the main driver of crop production in Australia, dryland cropping in Australia, and you can see the crop production variability for wheat, for example, is more than double that of like an area planted. Yield, which impacts across the supply chain, is mainly a driver of genotype or crop type, the environment, and also management. Production is then also a function of the market times the genotype environment management. At University of Queensland, we develop integrated systems approaches to derive novel solutions and enhance the productivity at the field scale and the farm level. Specifically, digital technologies, Industry 4.0, play a critical part in enhancing production and profitability. This includes crop modeling, drones, machine learning, and earth observation. As a young boy, I experienced firsthand growing up on a farm, a cropping farm in South Africa, the challenges my father had to make in terms of working the land, planning the fields field and the farm. And then also, as you can see there, he's writing in 1967, 1968 about planting maize and wheat and how dry it was. Keep in mind that in 1965, there's a main El Nino, and also at the same time, climate had teleconnections. And in Australia, Victoria faced the worst drought in 100 years. So there's interconnection. But those days, it was more opportunistic and one field at a time type of planning 60 years ago. Well, today and now in the future, we are having and using the capabilities of digital technologies more often and more advanced technologies to help us and farmers making more informed decisions much faster and much more in real time across multiple fields as well as multiple farms. So the next few slides will be about some of the approaches that we've developed. As I said, we've developed a yield forecasting approach at the sub-paddock scale. As you can see there, the fields, we predicted wheat yield for this specific farm at the 10-meter pixel scale with high R-square on an independent fields from that, away from that specific farm of 92% correlation. And there's a paper that you can go and read on that. That's so for 2020, further to crop yield, when we integrate some of these technologies from remote sensing and biophysical modeling, and also for all the wheat fields in Mauritius for 2020, you can see that we can predict the variability with not only between fields but also within a field within a specific season. The phenology, determining crop phenology is very important in terms of logistics and harvest logistics, and then season, when the season starts. So here you can see an example of the 2020 season for winter crop, all the wheat fields, and also all the other crops. So barley, wheat, canola, chickpea, and fava beans. We were able to then determine start of season of these crops using the remote sensing derivative approaches. Peak, which and obviously flowering, which is probably 2 to 3 weeks after peak canopy. You can see that barley and wheat, very similar peak timing. This is for Kita farming, the specific farming in Moree. And obviously then end of season harvesting, similar derivatives that we can map across within a field and also between fields, then is comparable in between crop types. The next step is now to develop predictive models that can actually predict the start of season, peak and end of season well before the season has started. So some other work that we've started on this is also looking at soil moisture predictions at the subfield scale using Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2. And there you can see we're getting some reasonably strong correlations already with some soil core measurements up to 90 centimeter depth in soil moisture across 3 locations across Australia. This now will enable us now also to look at a starting soil moisture within a field, but also between fields. So today we have the capability also to integrate and fuse this data across different scales, temporal and spatial scales. As you can see there, when we have integrated these climate data, soil moisture, canopy structure, chlorophyll, and then predict the yield for different zones inside a field and across fields, you can then use that information and make more informed decisions in terms of optimized input costs, managing the risk better, improve whole farm profitability and resource management. Another aspect or derivative we have now developed in the process of operationalize is crop intensity. So the same farm or different farms, you can look at different crop intensity patterns. Obviously, that relates to sustainability across at each field level, which becomes important decision-making information for a farmer, and can be then help to determine, also look at potential over long term. Some new frontiers that we are working on currently, most of these outputs I've shown here is from the CropFin, the GRDC funded project to predict crop phenology. And we've got also industry partner there, and that's data farming. We've got a crop vision project, which is ARC linkage project. And that mainly is the predicting of forecasting of wheat yield production at the field and within a field scale well before sowing. And we've already developed that framework is already developed in terms of yield well before sowing by integrating biophysical modeling, remote sensing, and also the global climate models to start forecasting production at 1st of January, 1st of February already. Advances and integration of sensing technologies, as you can see here, is projected to increase production by 70%, global crop production by 70%, the use of digital technologies. So these technologies are, as you all know, within this group and association, is advancing very fast, and already moving towards Industry 5.0 in agriculture, fully autonomous artificial intelligence. And if this will work, I'll just show you a short slide, video. I hope it works.
Andres, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I hope that was all did go according to plan, and you can see the application of different digital technologies across fields and seasons. And just finally, just want to thank University of Queensland, specifically our team members that is working with me on these type of projects that I mentioned already. We also have a supply chain digital twin project. It just started, and if you are interested in walking the supply chain with us, you can contact Dr. Adam Komarek at UQ. And I just want to thank also all the collaborative partners and funding partners involved in these projects. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Andres. You've been watching a lot of South Park by the look of it. We've got time for just one quick question. Rob Bramley has asked, you showed a lot of stuff there in that process there. He's after a bit more information on how you're estimating soil moisture at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, so we just started that work, and we're working on a project with an industry partner on that too. We're using historically hindcast mode. We're using the crop phenology, start of season derivatives, and then we use Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 data metrics or sensing metrics that we are currently working on, and algorithms to then also detect and relay that to the top 15 centimeter, top 60 centimeter, and top 90 centimeter soil moisture profiles from these different soil cores. So I said that algorithms and metrics is still in the process, but it shows some good promise in that regard.
Okay, yeah, that's a difficult area. Okay, so there's a couple of questions there. If you could answer them online, that'd be fantastic. We might have to move on. Thanks. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, up next, we're going to move into the realm of weeds. We've got Michael Walsh, who's Director of Weed Research at the University of Sydney. Michael's going to talk to us about the development of weed recognition technologies for grain production in Australia. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Brett. And good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, this is a bit of an overview of what we've been doing in the area of weed recognition over the last couple of years. And it's specifically focused on weed recognition for Australian grain production systems. So I guess my interest started in this area 5 or 6 years ago, following a conversation I had with the West Australian grain grower. So Andrew Messina had been a long-term user of harvest weed seed control systems, and I was talking to him about his success in this area and what that meant for his weed populations and then his weed control program. And his comment was that, I know there are weeds out there, but I don't know where they are, so I still have to spray the entire field. So what that meant was that even though he got his weed densities down to really low levels, he still wasn't comfortable in, I guess, easing up on his weed control program, because he knew that if he did, that there was still potentially going to be big problems or big consequences. So despite his best efforts and some good results, he wasn't able to realise the reduced weed control inputs from having low weed densities in his cropping paddocks. So site-specific weed control, in general terms, it does allow you to reduce your weed control inputs because you're specifically targeting weeds and not the whole field or the whole paddock. Importantly, it allows additional weed control options, so potentially new herbicides, which may be more effective when applied site-specifically. For a weed researcher like myself, the exciting opportunity is to use alternate weed control technologies. So things that non-chemical options, physical options, thermal options that typically are non-selective with site-specific weed control and, importantly, weed recognition. You can use these alternate technologies to specifically control weeds in cropping systems. But all this requires accurate weed recognition. So that's the linchpin in this whole site-specific weed control journey. So when we started first thinking about the site-specific weed control and the requirements for weed recognition, we decided that we really needed to, I guess, contextualise it a little bit, come up with what the scenarios are that we were really looking to work with. And so we decided that in broad terms, there's two general weed control timings where we would want weed recognition. So the first is the early post-emergence phase of a crop, and that's quite often referred to as the critical weed control period. That's when weeds do the most damage to crop production through competition for essential resources. So it's during that period that it is critical to remove weeds, to remove that competition and preserve your potential. The next phase after that is late post-emergence, when the crops are more established, they're more resistant to the weed competition effects, so there's not the same need to remove the weeds. And the goal there is really to target weed seed production and to prevent subsequent problems with weeds in future crops. So we decided to focus a little bit more on the early post-emergence phase and think a little bit more about the context, the weed control context there. So typically in Australian cropping systems, there's going to be a range of weed densities from high to hopefully low. The average crop production program is about 3,000 hectares, so it's quite large. The available time for weed control across that area is only about 3 weeks. You're going to have an open crop canopy during this period, so that means that the targets are readily visible. And predominantly the weeds are going to be small, so they'll be small, relatively small weed targets. And so the weed control challenge there is that we need to recognise and target weeds at least 6 hectares an hour to allow that area coverage over that short period of time. And so we feel that the current technologies that rely on boom sprays are probably the best technologies going forward, at least in the first instance, for developing weed recognition technologies. And that means boom-mounted cameras for recognising in-crop weeds that can then activate a nozzle or nozzles to target the in-crop weeds. So with our context, I guess, formalised, we've then been thinking about developing weed recognition capability. And the process that we're going down is to establish a suitable digital image database. So that means collection of in-context weed images. So images of the weeds in the crop as they occur as you're about to target them. So that means the cameras that are recognising the weeds are also going to be used for collecting the weed images for developing that recognition system. So once you've got your weed images, you have to annotate those images to identify where the weeds are and what the weeds are in those images. And that's to set up a database of annotated images that can then be used in algorithm development. So we use our weed image database for a machine learning based training to try and develop a hopefully highly accurate weed recognition algorithm. So in terms of annotation approaches, going from left to right and then down, it's getting more complex, I suppose. So we start off with just general classification that there's a weed image, a weed there. And then we go to bounding boxes on the right. And so that's just a box drawn around the weed or a weed plant part. And then we go to semantic segmentation down the bottom left. It's a pixel-wise identification of the weeds. And then instance segmentation, which is pixelized annotation of each weed plant in that weed image. So more and more sophistication in terms of the annotation process, which obviously results in increasing amounts of information that are available to use in terms of developing weed control technologies. So we've started off with our initial approaches to weed recognition development using a bounding box approach. And so this is an example here of what that actually looks like. So just drawing squares around the weed plant parts. In this case, it's the base of annual ryegrass plants. So this is sped up a little bit. But it shows that it is a relatively intensive process. It does take some time. And obviously takes time per image, but in terms of developing a suitable size database, it takes a considerable amount of time. More and more, we've been transitioning towards segmentation approach. So this is a pixel-wise annotation effort. And this is an example here for a ginger cropping system. Again, sped up a little bit. So this is Guy Coleman here is doing the annotation on these ginger plants. And it's essentially you're colouring in the whole plant. So you're identifying every pixel that plant occurs in. So considerably more laborious. Again, very time consuming in terms of trying to develop quite a large database. But a lot more information goes into that process. So there's a lot more opportunities for accurate targeting. So moving on from that, so we did annotate enough images to set up a database, and we've now set up an open source platform of annotated weed images, and it's called Weed AI with the website address there. And the functionality of this database is that you can upload data sets that you've collected and annotated. They have to be annotated data sets, and they're stored in a consistent storage format. There's obviously download access to that data. And one of the values of this database is that the data is stored in an ag context situation, or ag context information accompanying the data set. So the images are stored according to crop type, growth stages, weed species, crop species, etc. So it sorts and stores the data. And it allows specific data sets to be downloaded for specific weed recognition tasks. Now, we've had the data set available, or the open source platform available, for a few months now. It's increasing in size, but it's still got a long way to go before we can really comfortably allow or provide enough data to allow really accurate weed recognition for a whole range of weed species, let alone just the in-crop weed species. So using the data that we collected, we went through the process of developing weed recognition algorithms. And so our example weed species were turnip weed, a brassica, and then annual ryegrass, an example grassweed species. We had 2,000 images that were collected in wheat and chickpea crops. There was variable backgrounds and lighting conditions. And in this case, we used bounding box annotation process. So we went through the algorithm development process using 3 recognition architectures. And I guess the overall results are that we had some success with turnip weed. We were able to get about 60% accuracy with that, with the YOLO version 5, which was good. It's probably around about industry standards for recognition, but it's obviously not where we want to be comfortable in commercial cropping situations. But it's probably a good start, I guess. The annual ryegrass precision was much less, and it was expected, I guess, but yeah, nonetheless disappointing. But it does demonstrate that it's going to be inherently more difficult to develop an accurate algorithm for ryegrass than it is for turnip wheat, and specifically for a grass compared to a broadleaf. And that means there's going to be a much greater effort required for this recognition algorithm for ryegrass. So compared to turnip wheat, which is much more readily identifiable, I guess. So that's where we've got to at the moment with that. So how do we progress towards improving algorithm accuracy? Well, as I've stated, we need more images. We do need to get more efficient with our annotation process. So we need some pretty clever software engineering in that area to improve that side of it. Perhaps we also need a specific architecture for looking at weeds in cropping systems. The the architectures that we're using at the moment are all based on urban data sets, so houses, cars, cats, dogs, etc. Yeah, and we need more annotated images in general. So we really do need to have quite a concerted effort in the image collection annotation process before we can comfortably develop really good, solid recognition algorithms. So yeah, just in summary, site-specific weed control requires accurate weed recognition. We need that large annotated image database. There is a challenge of image annotation, and hopefully we'll get a lot more users accessing and utilising the open source database that we've established. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks very much. So that speed calculation you showed there, so that's a reasonable limitation, isn't it? Given the complexity you just showed us there.
Speed calculation for weed control.
Oh, well, as in being able to do it all at what would you say? You have to get 6 hectares an hour done with.
So, yeah. So I mean, 6 hectares an hour is not super fast, but that doesn't take into account the time when you can't spray over that 3-week period. So yeah, it is challenging, and it is, I guess, a constraint to the types of platforms that you can potentially use for weed control in large-scale cropping systems.
Yeah, that's true. Emma's asking here, have you considered using citizen science to get the databases? I guess you are.
Yeah, we have, and we're still hopeful that the citizen sciences have come through. There's just doesn't seem to be the same attraction for people wanting to colour in weeds as there is for people to monitor bush turkeys and things like that.
Black bees, yeah.
What we've found so far, but that's not going to stop us from trying.
Right. Yeah. And Andrew is asking if maybe if you get online there and share the link for your open source database for us.
Okay. Yep.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks very much, Michael. Okay. Next up, we've got one of the sponsors, the great sponsors of SPAA, are a great strength for the way this society works. And so we've got John Deere, we've got Benjamin Blevin, who's going to give us an update on what John Deere is up to. Benjamin's the Precision Ag Product Manager for Australia and New Zealand. So Benjamin, thanks.
Thanks. Brett, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, certainly. It's great.
Thanks. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present at the SPAA Symposium today. My name is Benji Blevin. I'm the Precision Ag Manager for John Deere in Australia and New Zealand, and based at the Brisbane head office here in Crestmead. I grew up on a farm in Zimbabwe before moving to Australia and finished my education at UQ as a mechanical engineer, and have been with John Deere now for just over 5.5 years, with most of that time spent in the field as a precision ag specialist, spending 2.5 years in Western Australia and another 2 years in Queensland before moving into this role, and mostly spending time with growers and dealers on how we can utilise technology that we have available to us to improve productivity and efficiencies on farm. So today I just wanted to focus primarily on a few key topics, give you an overview of our John Deere digital ecosystem, what that means, what that looks like from a practical standpoint, and then give you some practical examples of how our tools are being used by growers around the country today, and then finally end off with some resources that can help you get started, or if you're already on your precision ag journey, tools that you can use to take that next step. So I'll start with this slide, which really illustrates our digital ecosystems conceptually as it works today. So, every pass through the field or operation that occurs on a paddock is recorded, whether that be planting, spraying, or harvesting. And that data is collected and transferred wirelessly every 30 seconds to the cloud, and then is accessible by you as a grower through the John Deere Operations Center, which is our online farm management platform. You can interact with your machine and agronomic data and control how it's shared, whether that be on desktop, iPad, or mobile. So really is accessible anywhere, anytime. And then, as I said before, you have the ability to control how you share and connect that data, whether that be with your agronomist, research body, or with a connected software company. So You might have another platform that you prefer to use for a particular use, whether that be financial. It might be a more advanced agronomic analysis tool. A good example is AgWorld, which gets used by a lot of growers. So having a cloud-based system allows data to stream seamlessly between those two platforms back and forth. So whether it be data coming from the operations center into AgWorld or back into our platform. So I guess what we're starting to see now and moving forward into the future, I mean, you also have that ability to interact with the machine. Going down, there's an arrow there that says automation intel. You can send, we've been able to do this for some time, being able to send prescriptions over the air, whether that be for a spray application or for seeding. But moving forward and into the future, every pass in the field becomes an opportunity to learn something about that paddock, and there's an opportunity for us to do a better job the next time we come across. And if we can start to move beyond the paddock level and the zone level down to individual plant level, we understand where those plants are in the field. We can be more prescriptive and targeted with how we treat that individual plant in terms of chemical and management. So this is, I guess, a quick video to illustrate what that looks like in practice. And this is a harvesting operation where you've got two combines running in the field. They're connected telematically, so they can transfer coverage maps, guidance lines between the machines. But they are then also sending their yield information up to the cloud, where the grower who is at the center of that has visibility to the machines, their progress through the field, the yield maps that are coming through roughly every 10 minutes. Those production maps are updating. As I said before, the grower has the ability to share that information with either a dealer that you might be looking for machine optimization support, or just support on how to address something on the screen. You can share with the farm advisor or agronomist to help make decisions and really extract the maximum value from having access to that agronomic information. What can I do with it? What are my opportunities, and what should I look to tackle next? So what does that look like, I guess, on the Operations Center mobile app today? And I think what we see mostly is that growers prefer to use a mobile phone. It's a lot more accessible, and we're working hard to make features and products that are as capable as you would see on a desktop on your mobile phone. So the first example I'd like to run through is I guess, monitoring a spray application that's happening in real time. So you can, as a grower, you can see that machine operating in the field. You can see where it's been with location tracking. You can understand what percentage completed you're at, and how many hectares are left before that paddock is completed. From a spray records perspective, you're also able to see exactly what chemicals are being applied, or what's part of that tank mix that you're applying, what the rates are that operator is using. You can ensure that those are correct. And you can also see rate deviation. So that's an opportunity where you might be able to change the operator behavior to maximize that target rate and make sure you're hitting the right target rate that you've set for that job. So it's all about surfacing that information and making it easily and readily available in near real time so that you can take action on it. The next example is just of a harvesting operation and monitoring that as it's occurring. So you can see two combines there moving in the field and two chasing tractors. Those machines are updating every 5 seconds, so you can start to see and make decisions from that, not just from an agronomic perspective, but from the logistical harvest management perspective. You can see where all your operators are, how far through the field they are, and also, how many tons of grain you're pulling off, what sort of yields are you working with, and making sure that you're running an efficient logistics operation there. So again, trying to surface that information in near real time and getting closer and closer to that point of getting that yield data visible to you as a grower within that 10 to 15 minute time frame, but machine location every 5 seconds. So I just want to focus on, I guess, the physical workflow of a single operational season and what that looks like on farm. If we take seeding and harvest, for example, or harvest, for example, and I mean, if we assume we have no digital tech in our workflow, you would still go through the process of setting up your machines and doing maintenance and planning out the seasonal operation ahead with your team and making sure they're all understanding what their roles are. And as that job's happening, you're monitoring the work, you're on the phone, managing product inventory, staff, the quality of the work being done. And at the end of the season, you're coming back and analyzing and reflecting on that and what worked well, what improved our yields and productivity, and how could you potentially be improving for the year ahead. I guess we understand that digital ag is not easy to layer over the top of that physical process. So we're trying to build out our tools within the operations center that are aligned to this workflow, that are intuitive and easy to use, particularly if you're a person that's never used these digital tools before. It's about making it easy and accessible. So, hey, I'm in this stage of the season, and it makes sense for me to go to the plan section, and I can access those tools. So I guess layering digital technologies over the top of our traditional physical processes, it's not about changing how you farm, it's just about enabling you to have the most informed decision possible by having actionable data available at the time that decision or planning is being made. So as I said, from a digital perspective, if we layer that over the top, your setup only really needs to happen once. You have physical fields. It's about setting up accurate field boundaries and guidance lines and products that are in that digital landscape, ensuring you capture that accurate and actionable data set. And the other thing that's critical here is that digital infrastructure like boundaries is key to advanced guidance features like the automation of headland turns and automating headland passes so that you don't have to drive them. So that's all improving accuracy, and eventually, we're moving forward towards that totally autonomous space where the machine is able to drive itself completely through the field. So that's all dependent on accurate boundaries, and it's worth bearing in mind. And from a planning perspective, you're able to collaborate during that planning process because it's available in the cloud. You can share it with agronomists and with staff so that they can provide input and provide value to what you've done in the past that might not have worked and what you need to be doing going forward. And also, just from an implementation of that plan, you can allocate work to staff digitally so that they can see on the app what they need to be doing, what chemicals, what products they're applying, what fields they need to be working in. When the work's happening, you have access to, see where those machines are, what the progress is, and also it's really about understanding the quality of the work that's being done on a broader scale, so you can identify issues as they're happening and make changes to make sure that you're achieving the outcome that you're looking for. And finally, coming back to analyze, if you've done all those steps right at the beginning of the season in terms of setup, you're really able to come back and get a complete picture for what you've done throughout the season and how that's affected the yield outcome at the end of the year, and then use that information to change what you do for the year and years ahead. And finally, I guess the digital ecosystem that we've talked about and this workflow and this framework is really underpinned by 4 key technologies. It doesn't matter what brand of equipment you're running. A display in the cab connected to a GPS receiver. They're collecting data spatially, and then that data is sent to the cloud wirelessly via connectivity or telematics. And then finally, you've got your farm management system where you'd be able to analyze and interpret and visualize that information that you've recorded. So if you take one of those pieces out, you start to lose the automation of that data collection, and that's when it becomes hard using USBs. If you can automate the data collection, it becomes easy to visualize it and take action and do something and derive value from your information. So if you are interested to spend some time with the Operations Center and get started with it, you can navigate to operationscenter.deere.com. That's available on the Android Google Play Store as well as Apple App Store, and you should see all of the tools, well, some of the tools that we've talked about today. And the final piece I wanted to talk about as it relates to our digital ecosystem is that in July we announced that our connectivity comes at no added cost with equipment. So you're able to control the connection of your equipment to the cloud. You can turn it on, you can turn it off, and it's just a toggle. So previously that came with an annual subscription that was managed through your dealership. That is all now in the hands of the customer, yourselves as growers, to manage yourselves through your Operations Center organization. So, and it's, turn it on and leave it on, or you can turn it off and leave it off. So it's up to you what you want to do from a connectivity perspective. I'll now just shift gears quickly and focus on a couple of our recently released onboard autonomous technologies. The first of these is See and Spray Select on our self-propelled sprayers, which was developed in partnership with USQ and is our spot spraying solution on fallow ground using RGB cameras on the boom to detect green plants on fallow ground obviously reducing chemical costs as well as achieving environmental and ecological outcomes. So how does it work? It really is, it's a system of 36 cameras across 120-foot boom, so 1 meter spacings. As I said before, they're RGB cameras, not NIR, so it really is just looking for the color green and then spraying that on the backdrop of brown soil or stubble. So it's either fallow or stubble ground. It's capturing those images on the go, and it's, I guess, a completely embedded and versatile solution. So you can just use the sprayer as a broadacre blanket spray, or you can choose to spot spray from the seat of the cab. And also all of that data is being sent obviously to the operations center for you to analyze after the work's being completed. On board, you're analyzing through our processes, analyzing 200 meters squared per second at the max speed of using See and Spray, which is 19 kilometers per hour. And it determines if a green weed is present and then actuates the correct spray nozzle. Herbicide then hits the weed, and all of that's being done within 200 milliseconds at that top speed. From a digital and analysis perspective, it's, as I said before, that layer automatically gets sent into the ops center where you can view it and very quickly understand what area of your field was not applied with product. And as you can see spatially there, you start to get a really good understanding of where you've got the weed burden. And you might use that for a prescription later on, or you would go back through with another spot spray. And you can also identify what product you've saved in terms of chemical. So what you would have sprayed if you did a blanket rate versus what you did spray using See and Spray. The second example is a field that has less of a weed burden, and traditionally you might have thought, oh, well, I'll just do a blanket spray because it's pretty much covered. But as you can see, and what we found from all of our test cooperators in the last couple of years is that if it's a 10% saving, if it's a 15% saving, it's still a saving, and you may as well be spot spraying in that fallow situation. So in this case, it was a 24% area not applied and a 24% saving in terms of chemical volume as well. And the final piece I'll touch on is Combine Advisor, which is, I guess, a technology which allows you to automate the settings adjustment of the 5 key combine settings, being concave clearance, rotor speed, fan speed, and sieve and chaffer. So it uses 2 cameras, one on the clean grain elevator and one on the tailings elevator, to analyze the grain sample and the quality on the go, as well as losses, and then uses that to adjust those 5 settings to maintain a target that you set for that machine. The run pages on the Gen 4 make it really easy to see what those cameras are seeing, both on the clean grain and tailings. And then you can also understand what automation technologies you've got switched on and off. And that final graph on the right is, it shows you what adjustments the machines have made and the effect that that's had on grain quality and loss over the last 30-minute period of time. So you have complete transparency as to what the machine's adjusting, and you have the ability to override that if you wanted to. And just quickly, I think I've gone over time, but we recently released a dedicated website to help you get started with precision ag. So this website covers everything from case studies to how-to videos. It's got a few different sections, talking to the value of farm data, the John Deere digital ecosystem, as well as get started videos. So starting at the basic level of how to set up an account, how to transfer data, how to view data, and then how do you improve from there using that same framework we talked about around setup, plan, monitor, and analyze. And then we're just about to release a get ready for harvest section, which talks through a bunch of how-to videos on how to use some of these automation technologies that we've talked about today. And if you're interested, you can use this QR code and it'll take you straight to the site now, and you can take a look for yourself. But that's all I had. Thanks, Brett.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Benji. Yeah, we're going to have to move on. If you can just unshare that, that'd be great. There's a couple of questions for you in both the chat and the Q&A, and there was a question that came through the chat from the panelists, but maybe you can make a comment in there. You're gathering so much fantastic information. Is John Deere looking at moving into decision support as well? Maybe you can make a comment in the chat for us as well as we go.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks very much, Benji. Thanks a lot. Okay, next up, we're moving into the practitioners world. We've got a farmer, Daniel Adams, who's a grower from South Australia, and he's going to talk to us about his targeted approach to managing the variability in his soil. So, Daniel, Take it away. Thanks very much.
Yep. How's that? Is that coming through?
Yep, perfect.
Cool. No worries. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniel Adams, farmer in South Australia, Cockaleachy. Just get this happening. Just a few take-home messages. Yeah, we find yield maps in our farm yeah, part of the best part for gathering information and using that to improve, I guess, management across our farm. And also soil zone testing has been a powerful tool. A variable rate, we've had a cost saving and also increased our yields at the same time. Precision ag, it makes it easy to locate trials and measure the results and see what we're doing in the field, if it's making money or not. And also patch ryegrass management of herbicides and variable rate seeds helped us to get on top of ryegrass to an extent. So yeah, we farm with my parents and my wife at Cockaleachy, South Australia, on Eyre Peninsula, right in the middle of the peninsula. And yeah, we have a port down south pictured there, Port Lincoln. That's our main export port. So background to our farm, we've got what I consider highly variable soils and yeah, a large difference in water holding capacity of those soils. Annual ryegrass has been a big problem for us, especially since we've started continuous cropping back in the 90s. And yeah, got a number of areas prone to waterlogging, which makes it a bit difficult for growing some crop types. And we're fairly small farmers for our community here. So it sort of led us to precision ag to try and capture some, the best results we can off our land. Yeah, so as I said, we've got highly variable soils and yeah, we're fairly high input farming. So a lot of nitrogen, fertilizers, and also a lot of chemicals, mostly targeting ryegrass. So yeah, and you can see here when we started to look down the precision ag a little bit more seriously was similar to this year when fertilizer prices went crazy in 2008. That's when we made the switch to variable rate phosphorus in our crop. And yeah, I imagine a lot of people will be considering it at the moment with high both nitrogen and all fertilizer costs increased considerably in the last few months. So yeah, Dad had the foresight to set up yield monitors back in 2002 when we upgraded our header. And yeah, it was just fairly simple back then, a little Garmin GPS receiver on the roof and a little card reader. I had a bit of difficulty getting everything set up with, yeah, not a great deal of support back then, but so we had, you can see in the map below, we had, various paddocks not quite capturing it, and a couple of years we lost all the information completely with corrupt files and the like. Yeah, continue to spend money on screens and stuff. Yeah, put auto section on the sprayer, which also gave variable rate capabilities, and yeah, changed the head over to a John Deere in 2009. But yeah, the big thing that's probably been for us was having variable rate in our seeder, which we started in 2008 but completed in 2009, enabled phosphorus-based fertilizers and also variable rate seeding, and it was quite a powerful screen for its time. And yeah, continued with our nitrogen in 2012, and also gypsum and lime in 14. Yeah, probably one of the bigger benefits for us using precision ag on our farm has been just being able to measure these a number of years. This is 4 or 5 years of phosphorus removal map on the right hand side there, and we've just gone and put pins in and then soil tested those positions, so high performing in the green there and poor in the red, and we've taken a few soil tests in between, and yeah, given us a good indication of where we're at in those soils and why they're performing well and why they're not. Here's just a quick graph from those soil tests, and you can quickly see that, yeah, pH was one of our issues in that poorer zone, which we've since addressed with variable rate lime. And yeah, phosphorus was considerably, we're starting to get a bit low on phosphorus in some of our good production areas. So we've been looking to increase that there. And maybe in some areas of our farm, we can actually mine some of that phosphorus. Yeah, some of the phosphorus rates were, yeah, this was before DGT come out. Yeah, considerably different across our farm. So where there's variability, it gives us something to be able to manage. So yeah, a bit more on our journey when it comes to phosphorus. Mostly we started by using fairly simple map with phosphorus replacement, and slowly have increased our zones as we get a bit more knowledge behind it, and a little bit of, yeah, started in 2010 to use variable rate seed where we had, I guess, poor establishment. We increased our seeding rate trying to pick that up, and also competition on ryegrass. And yes, variable rate urea or nitrogen has been a little bit tricky to know what the best method is. So we've used the long-term yield trends in the past to determine where to put nitrogen, and we've probably moved a bit more to using satellite imagery, but also using this long-term trends to where we hold better soil moisture to top up at the end of the year, but satellite imagery throughout the season. And yeah, also variable rate herbicides we've used in high density weed areas, which I'll go on in a minute. So here's just an example. What we did early on, had a yield map, and a lot of those low yielding areas were for weeds or sort of water logging prone areas. So you're using that map, and then we can target plant densities to try and compete with the weeds. And yeah, similar with nitrogen, have a satellite image, and we just use that image to create a nitrogen map to try and even up our paddock and get good biomass across the whole paddock. And here's just a couple of infield. You can see the difference. So we've got heavy red clays in the foreground here, and then through to limes, you can see this is extreme, but you can see the plant density and biomass. And also on the right here, we have canola paddock, and there's a similar in the foreground. It's thinner and goes to thicker in the back. And you can see my variable rate nitrogen map here, showing the same thing. We're going from we're putting out high rate here, and then we're dropping back as we're going into a higher biomass area. This is probably the more interesting thing we've been doing lately. I've been using just a fairly basic GIS-based app on my phone to just drop points. So you can see here, these are all individual points over a period of a few years. I've just been driving along in whatever I'm doing, seeding, spraying, spreading, or at harvest, and dropping a pin saying, okay, I think this is a bad weed area. So I'll number it 1 to 5, 5 being really bad and 1 being not so bad, and just dropping a pin and putting that number allocation down to it. So you can see here, I've got ryegrass given a rating of 3, and then that exports as a CSV, and I can just make that background map from all those waypoints that I've dropped. So, and I just update these as I'm going along occasionally if I think it's considerably different to what I've marked in the past. And then I can use these maps to apply either pre-emergent herbicides at high rates, or this is a operation on the operations center as applied map, and this is variable rates box of gold in crop. So you can see where it's higher weed density through here, we have applied a higher application rate, and areas that weren't so bad, we chose not to put any on at all. And yeah, so we've been doing this, and it's definitely had a benefit to keep on top of ryegrass, but we've also used it for just rocks, managing rocks. We've gone back and picking rocks, and or snails or wild oats, or any issue you have, you can manage quite easily with the technology that we all carry around in our hands, being either a tablet, iPad, smartphone. We carry around these incredible computers all the time with us. So yeah, this was a free app. We can unlock a few more features I think it's called Maps Plus. You can unlock a few more features by paying a small fee. And it's just good for monitoring crops. You sort of, you can go to a high weed density area pretty easy when you're out scouting and sort of see what it's doing this year in that area. If your pre-emergents have done a good job, well, you need to come back and crop. Yeah, and here's just a couple of examples, photos of us applying in crop. And yeah, so we increase our, with a pre-emergent up to 10 to 20%, just to try and get a bit more chemical on some of those higher density weed areas. But yeah, generally we're only increasing our total usage of chemical, depending on the paddock, by approximately 4 to 8%. That's a bit of a guess, that percentage there. And also, because we don't have any direct injection, we're just increasing our total water volume to increase the chemical. And we also, I reckon, we're getting a lot better coverage, especially when you've got small weeds. But the only problem with that is, if your pressures get too high, then you need to be careful and have to slow down your ground speed, which is, something you just got to keep in mind on if you're going to utilise the total tank mix volume increase like we are doing. And it's hard to measure results, I've got listed there. But yeah, test strips, it's been a big improvement for us, being able to put it on high nitrogen or try new fungicides or PGRs or varieties, and just to be able to manage them and visualize, go out and see them in the paddock. You can walk out and you can actually see exactly where you are and where the different treatments have been done. And here's just an example of when we were trying cobra and mace and wild catchum, and you can see the yield benefit we had in that particular year with mace. So yeah, you manage and measure the results. I guess with all this, it's hard to, when you're doing a lot of variable rate, it's hard to know. You got a few trials to see if you've done better or not, but as an overall, it's hard to know how much increase. You can see a bit of a cost saving with fertilizers from time to time, but it's harder to measure the total dollar benefit, I guess. But I thought these are two interesting graphs I put up. Here's our water use efficiency since we purchased land on Eyre Peninsula, so back to 1992. Started off with quite a wet year, so very poor water use efficiency. We've had quite a steady increase, and this is about where we really picked up on precision ag technology, and I think we've seen quite a steady increase and a real kick up in the last few years. And this one here, this map is just a gross margin map since 2007. So yeah, I guess things are going better, and I think precision ag's been a big help to us through in that. So just in summary, yield maps are very important to us. They're the basis for most of our decision maps making. Soil test, key to understanding, I guess, what that variability is and why. And test strips, what you can't measure, you can manage. So if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we use that a bit, and certainly with nitrogen and new varieties, it's a very handy tool. And we've done a lot of pH mapping in the last 5 to 10 years to try to get our pH right, and done that variable rate. Variable rate phosphorus was one of the first things we started to do. It just makes sense if you've got reasonable levels. And also we've tried to increase our levels where we've been taking a lot of production off over a lot of years. We've been adding extra to those rather than just a straight phosphorus removal. Variable rate seed, it's fairly easy and cost effective. We've got some heavy red soil types that we struggle to get biomass, so we increase our seeding rate on them. And also, where there's bad weeds, we've also increased our seeds there to try to help with competition. Variable rate spraying with our older style, just changing the overall volume is a bit harder to manage with. You need to be careful of your pressures and your speed, but a bit harder to execute. But I think it's paid dividends for us, especially with coming back in crop with some expensive chemistry. Your mobile phone is a pretty powerful tool, and if you can utilize that to make better decisions, and also just to see what you've been doing in field, it's very handy. People ask me where from here. It's always tricky. I think more targeted soil testing, trying to account for more of the variability. We've done some sort of zone testing. We might move to a bit more point testing. I think we had the potential to push some of our higher production areas more. And yeah, whether a crop spec protein meter may be the way to do that, I'm not sure. It's certainly on our wish list. And yeah, drones have been, I messed around with drones a little bit. I found it a bit hard to get across the amount of country we need to, so we've been trying to rely on satellite imagery more. So robotics certainly interests me in the future to see where that goes. And there's a few other things listed there I might skip for the sake of time. And yeah, just a couple of pictures to finish on if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Daniel. I've got, well, we've got a quick question. So you've obviously spent a fair bit of money on your soil testing, and so you've obviously see that's been of great use. It's fairly obvious, I guess, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, it's probably something we should be doing more of. Certainly pH mapping. We've done a lot of that. You can see, yeah, quite easily. Just put a pH map into a line map and go out and spread. And also, yeah, we've done a reasonable amount of zone testing, but it's something I'm looking to do more of. Yeah, the last 5 years we haven't done a great deal of, and we've done a fair few different things in that time frame. So, yeah, okay. It's certainly something we're looking to improve on, but it has identified, I guess, low phosphorus in a few of our areas, and also, yeah, the pH issue. It certainly started us off down that path.
Yeah, and you can see, I guess the value in that is you can see that in those great graphs you showed a minute ago, the water use efficiency going up like that. If you can fix a problem in the soil like you have with the pH and start getting better production out of it, it's going to push that water use efficiency straight up. Yeah, it's hard to account for what exactly is the increase, but yeah, I guess you're always trying to make better decisions in everything you do. But yeah, precision ag, soil testing, measuring results all helps in that. Yeah, okay. Great. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. We're going to move on. I think I'd just like to point out from Daniel's been doing a lot of work with SPAA and in these precision ag training workshops. And so there's some new hands-on precision ag training workshops that are going to be rolled out across the country. But the Victorian and Southern New South Wales ones that were coming have been postponed until February and March in 22. So if you can keep updated on the SPAA website for news about those, and they're sponsored by the GRDC, who, as we've seen in a few talks already, are great supporters of the work that everybody's doing here. Right, finally, before we have a small break, we have Patrick Filippi, who works in the Precision Ag Lab. He's going to talk to us about improving the farming game, and he's going to tell us a story about interpretive machine learning to map the drivers of yield variability. Thanks, Pat.
Cool, thank you, Brett. Can you see that screen all right?
Yep.
Cool, just got to pin this up. Sorry. Okay. Cool, thanks everyone. Yeah, so today we'll be talking about interpretive machine learning to map the drivers of yield variation. I'd just like to thank my colleagues Tom Bishop, Brett Whelan, Ed Jones, Pat Holm, and Brendan Malone for helping me with this work. Yep, cool. So look, we know crop yields are affected by many spatial and temporal variables and their interaction. Look, the impact of temporal variables on yield, such as weather variables, are often quite directly obvious. So if we get a lot of rainfall, we get a lot of yield. If we don't get much rainfall, we don't get much yield. So from season to season, it's easy to understand the impact of these temporal variables on yield, but it's often quite difficult to pinpoint causes of spatial variables on yield within fields. So we know that soil and terrain attributes are generally the largest causes of this within field yield variation. And farmers and agronomists do have a good idea of the primary cause of this variation, but this is usually qualitative and poorly recorded. There's a growing volume and diversity of on-farm and off-farm spatial and temporal variables that describe crop yield. So, growers have a lot of soil data now. Some even have proximately sensed information such as EM. We get operational data from tractors, combines. We've got soil maps across all of Australia now. So this is some of the off-farm stuff. we have daily gridded weather information, and we have satellite imagery from a range of different satellites at varying spatial and temporal resolutions. So it's really led to an increased focus on using empirical models and machine learning to model crop yield. So it's not mechanistic approaches like AppSim, they're just data-driven approaches. And these have really been built for various purposes. You know, one of the main ones is forecasting yield. So, you know, what is my yield going to be at the end of the season? But it's also about hindcasting and extrapolating yield too. So what was my yield last year, or what was my yield in a different field? But there's also an opportunity here to use these empirical or data-driven yield models to understand the primary drivers of yield variation and identify the most limiting constraints to production. So the problem with machine learning models are that they're like black boxes. You know, it's really hard to understand what is happening in there. And so we have these traditional or inbuilt methods of assessing variable importance. So they're really global methods. So they show the overall importance for the model. So I've got an example here, example variable importance plot. It's basically showing you this variable is more important, this variable is less important. So it really gives you no insight into what is driving yield in particular locations. And, you know, this is a limitation, as a variable, you know, may not impact yield across most of the data set, but in a particular subset of the data set, it could have a really important impact. And, you know, if we use these traditional variable importance approaches, we just completely miss that, we overlook it. So interpretive machine learning techniques such as Shapley additive explanation, or SHAP values, are really good opportunity to overcome these limitations. So they have the ability to identify which variables contribute to increasing or decreasing yield at discrete locations, you know, how much they impact this in interpretable units, so in bales a hectare or tons per hectare, and their relative contribution too. And, you know, in the end, this really aids in identifying the cause of low crop yields, and can then inform decisions on, you know, what management interventions need to be made to try and close some of these yield gaps. So another common problem when assessing drivers of empirical models is that variables that are not directly interpretable are often used to model yield. So a good example of this is, you know, getting an ECA map from an EM survey and using as a variable to describe yield in a yield model. So we know, you know, EM data can highly relate to yield, but it's really hard to understand how this impacts yield. So what we need to do here is do some feature extraction and transformation of the variables. So we've got an ECA map here. So instead of directly using that in the yield model, what we would do is we would combine it with some soil information, do some digital soil mapping, and, you know, basically create a map of soil constraints in 3D. So here we've got a map of the depth that a pH constraint of 9 is reached within the field. So we really need to use easily interpretable predictor variables as really aid in understanding the driving factors of yield. So it's not just about shoving as many variables as possible, as, you know, we often see in a lot of machine learning models. They just put 100 variables in and, you know, they'll spit out an answer. It's not about that anymore. So that's the long-winded intro, but basically this is a study area and the data that we'll be using and talking about today. So we've got Cubby Station here, or a subset of Cubby Station in Dirranbani in Queensland. So we've used 8 flood irrigated fields here, a total about 2,000 hectares. And we're using some yield monitor data of cotton, irrigated cotton from the 2017 season. We collected 75 soil cores to 1.4 meters. And these sites were basically, as you can see down here, selected using a condition Latin hypercube. So what that means is, you know, we got our EM map, we got a gamma map, elevation map, and a map of the bare soil redness. And then we just kind of sampled that to make sure that we captured all of that variability. So where we're actually sampling our site, we're capturing the variability across the study area. So we analyzed these soil cores at all depths for pH, ESP, so sodicity, and ECE, so we looked at salinity too, and then we did some texture too. And yeah, so we focused on all 8 fields here, but also one field just down here as a case study is a little bit easier to interpret. So these are the spatial data layers that we use for modeling, these 6 here. So the top 3 are digital soil maps, you know, created using those same covariates, so the EM and the gamma data and some elevation, and those collected soil cores. So what we have here is the depth that we're reaching a pH constraint above 9, the depth that we're reaching an ECE constraint of above 10 decisiemens a meter, and the depth we're reaching an ESP constraint greater than 10%. So you can see the ECE, there wasn't too much of a constraint across the area. So what's good about these depth to constraint maps is that it represents the whole soil profile in 3D rather than just the topsoil or just the subsoil. So we see a lot of people using digital soil maps in yield models. They'll use 0 to 5, 5 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 to 60. It's just way too much information. It's kind of hard to interpret. So we've got 3 soil maps here, but we also have 3 important terrain infrastructure variables. So we've got closed depressions. So anything that's light blue, it's basically flat. Anything that's that dark blue, we're seeing large holes. They kind of just naturally occur over time on these laser leveled flood irrigated fields. We've got the distance down furrow. So the brown color being close to the head ditch and the blue color being close to the tail drain, which, you know, this obviously has a pretty important impact on moisture within fields. We've got cut and fill maps too. So the blue areas are high areas of fill, and the brown areas are high levels of cut, which obviously have an impact on yield too. So once we get all our data ready, the first step's really about building a yield model. So we use machine learning for this. So specifically an XG boost, gradient boosted decision tree model. It's a fairly simple model structure here. We've just got yield is a function of, you know, ESP, pH, ECE, you know, all those variables I showed you in the last slide. We did a 10-fold cross-validation. We can see the fit is pretty good. It just really shows that the predictor variables in the model can describe that spatial variability in yield well. But what we did is we built an individual model on each field. We didn't kind of aggregate all of the fields together and yeah, do that together. I think it made more sense to specifically do it for each field. So after we predicted on each field, did the 10-fold cross-validation, we've predicted it here, aggregated all together. You can see we've got an LCCC, a Linz concordance correlation coefficient of 0.9. So that's basically quite similar to the R squared, but it shows the fit along that red line, that 1-to-1 line. And an LCCC of 1 is perfect. So we can see it's a really good fit at 0.9. So moving on to that case study field, you see our LCCC is still quite good, 0.68. And we can see from the density plot that most of those points are hitting along that 1-to-1 line. And then here we've just got the variation within each field, a box plot of the RMSE and the LCCC. So some fields are, you know, a little bit better at 0.65 RMSE. Some fields are a little bit worse at 0.9, and same for the LCCC. So there's a little bit of variation within there. So the next step, once we've got that yield model, is really about using interpretive machine learning to identify the local primary spatial drivers of yield. So here we use the SHAP values, as I mentioned before. And what these SHAP values do is they provide local model explanation and the contribution of each predictor to yield for each data point. So the SHAP values are calculated for each point in the training data set, and the sum of each variable SHAP values is the deviation from the field average. So this is a similar plot to what I showed you before, that global variable importance plot. But instead of just having one point, it basically has a point for every single point in the data set. So we can see here that we've got the feature value. So when the particular feature or the particular variable has a low value, it's yellow. And when the particular feature has a high value, it's purple. So if we look at the distance down furrow, we can see when we have a high distance down the furrow, it's having a positive impact on yield. Because on the x-axis, we actually have the SHAP value in bales a hectare. So it's in interpretable units, which makes it a bit easier. So when we have a high distance down furrow, it's a positive impact on yield. A low distance down the furrow, there's a negative impact on yield. You can see the same when we get a high level of cut, it's having a negative impact on yield. Or for ESP, as another example, when we see a shallow depth to constraint. So when we're hitting an ESP constraint right in the topsoil, it's having a big negative impact on yield. And when we're hitting a constraint much deeper down the profile, it's having a positive impact on yield. So, you know, this all makes sense. And these particular green points here is just the values for one particular point in the data set. So we can see where this one sits. It's the distance down furrow is positively impacting yield. The cut and fill, so a large cut, is having a negative impact on yield. You know, hitting an ESP constraint right in the topsoil is having a negative impact on yield. You know, pH doesn't impact too much. We've got a bit of a hole here, which is negatively impacting yield. And ECE is also not having a big impact on yield. So if we added all this up, I think it equals, you know, roughly negative 1.5 bales a hectare. So if our global mean or our field average is, say, 14 bales a hectare, we can say that the prediction at this point would be 12.5 bales a hectare. So it's just that 14 bales a hectare. Sum these all together, take it away, yeah, it'll be about 12.5 bales a hectare. So as you can see, there's a lot of information kind of condensed into this figure, whereas before, previously, you just look at it and you go, oh, okay, this one's more important, this one's less important. So we can actually visualize that into a nice map of, you know, the variable at each location that is having the biggest negative impact on yield. If we look here, we can see these are our different variables. You know, if we look across the whole study area, visually it is a little difficult to interpret. If we just focus on our case study field, it's a little bit easier. So we could see here a large patch having quite a negative impact on yield. That's the most constraining factor there. We can see these little blue patches where the closed depression is actually the biggest negative impact on yield. So that's you know, quite valuable, this map here, but also it's good to look at you know, visualizing this, which is basically this plot here, visualizing that and mapping it. So I think these maps are much better for understanding the impact and the magnitude of each variable and yield. So these are the SHAP maps here, and then we have the corresponding maps of each particular variable. It really just helps to understand the causes of spatial variability and whether this makes sense, whether it's logical. So if you look at closed depressions in this case study field, we can see large closed depressions are that dark blue. And if we looked at the corresponding SHAP value map, which so red's a negative impact on yield, green's a positive impact on yield, and yellow is basically no impact on yield, we can see where we have large holes, it's having a big negative impact on yield. So that makes sense. We've looked down the distance down furrow. When we're a long way from the head ditch, it's having a positive impact on yield, which is probably likely to do with soil moisture and drainage. We imagine that would change from season to season, depending on management and rainfall. Cut and fill, it's not so clear, but you know, when we have high levels of fill and high levels of cut, it's having a negative impact on yield, which makes a lot of sense. The pH didn't have too much of an impact on yield, but we can see when we're reaching a pH constraint right in the topsoil, we're getting a slight negative impact on yield. And when we're, you know, reaching a constraint much deeper in the profile, it's having a slightly positive impact on yield. ECE, so salinity, not a big problem in this field. We've got a few little patches here where it's a problem deeper in the subsoil, but really no impact. The models pick that up. And ESP is having quite a big negative impact on yield in locations where we're hitting an ESP constraint of 10%, you know, at 15 centimeters right in that topsoil. Whereas when we're hitting an ESP constraint much deeper in the subsoil, it's having a positive impact on yield. So I think in conclusion, really visualizing SHAP values into maps showing the variables most negatively impacting yield really ease the interpretation of the results. And yeah, using easily interpretable predictor variables is important for this analysis. You know, if I used NDVI and ECA, it'd be much harder to interpret, you know, how is that actually impacting yield? Whereas we use things like closed depressions, you know, and depth to ESP constraints. Sorry, I've just hit that there. I'll have to slide through. Sorry. Yeah, oh, I've done it again. Apologies. I won't touch it now. All right, cool. I'll leave it now. Yeah, so using easily interpretable predictor variables, you know, it's very important. We don't want to just shove anything in because we're not going to get any value out of it. I think using interpretive machine learning is a really promising approach for identifying the primary spatial drivers of yield within fields, and also quantifying the magnitude of yield loss caused by each variable. And I think it is a more quantitative way to aid growers and agronomists to implement management strategies to overcome the primary limitations of yield. I think these maps of the impact of individual variables on yield means that growers can determine the cost benefit of an amelioration strategy. For example, how much would it cost to put some gypsum on here versus what is the benefit of cotton yield increase? There's some future work to happen here. We'll be implementing it across multiple seasons, as the main drivers of yield may fluctuate from season to season, as we know. And we'll also include both spatial and temporal variables, and look at multiple yield maps over time, not just one particular season. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. So, welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to have an update from another great sponsor of SPAA, Case IH. We've got Andrew Kissel, who's the product manager for planning and soil management equipment at Case. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. I'm certainly happy to be here today. And I think the title probably is leaving a few of you scratching your heads. So I guess just a quick background or a quick update on our organization, just to help sort of, clear that up, is I have taken a new role within the organization. So I've moved on to a role that is the product manager for all of our planting, seeding, and tillage equipment, and that's in the CNH family. So that's FlexiCoil, Horde, Bagshaw, Early Riser planters, which are our Case IH precision planters, and K-line. So as I've transitioned into this new role, we've had someone come in, a fellow by the name of Sean McCauley, who some of you may have met and worked with in the past. Sean has stepped in earlier this year and has taken over the AFS product manager role, managing all of our precision farming portfolio for Case IH. Sean's unavailable today, so I figured I'd put on my AFS hat and come talk to you for a few minutes today. The plan, or sort of the goal for the discussion today, is just to give you an overview of our business and where we see the industry going. For those of you that were at the discussion a few years ago when we were in Adelaide, probably the tone of this will be slightly different than what we had during that conversation. The goal today is to talk to you about some solutions that are readily implementable, something you can do today. I don't think that's a word. My point is, the discussion we're going to have is just to be clear on where we're at, where we are going, and how we want to work to be sort of the best partner we can be in the industry. And so that's a two-phase, or sort of a 2 or 3-pronged solution. It's through machinery and technology. And so we feel like in order to be our best and to be the best partner to the industry is to be open and connected. For a long time, especially when it comes to technology, we were very sheltered, very siloed. And we think that for the industry to progress and for, the benefit of customer choice and for all those things, open and connected is the way forward. So examples of that: earlier this year, some of you may be familiar with Data Connect, right? That sort of agreement between John Deere, Claas, CNH, 365 FarmNet, and more partners is there so that now all of a sudden, if you've got a multicolor fleet and you want to be involved in telematics, you don't have to have 7 logins to sign into these different platforms, right? You use a single login, and there's a greater level of integration, greater than what a sort of an API would provide, between all of us for this data connect. And that it allows you to leverage a platform that you like and make your machinery decisions independent of your technology decisions. Now, some of you may already been doing that, but some of you are also familiar with how difficult that can be. And so this transition, this, data connect is a great sign of things to come. Other things that sort of, help us emphasize the importance of openness and connectivity is ISOBUS. It's a real shining light in our industry, I think, certainly, of what the way forward needs to be. It's not like this is a good this is an option. This is the path forward, right? That ISOBUS standardization, where with a single controller in the cab or a single display in the cab, you can connect and operate a wide range of implements. Some of the examples we have here, right, are taking an old fertilizer spreader that, maybe wasn't ISOBUS controlled, fitting it with an ISOBUS rate controller or an ISOBUS rate and section controller, right? And then adding ISO scales to that. Now, all of a sudden, with scales and a spreader, we can do auto calibrations and we can improve our record keeping, right? One of the things I'm going to talk about here in a second is the importance and the value of good record keeping. You've heard it. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard already 3 or 4 times today. And, Matthew Davies is going to talk about it as soon as I get done talking to you. The way forward is easy record keeping. And so if we can automate that process with smarter implements, that's a win-win for everybody. When you look at, air seeders and planters and fertilizer sprayers, and sometimes I think we as manufacturers and, retailers, we sometimes want to wave the latest and greatest shiny things at you to put behind your latest and greatest shiny tractor. But that is not the reality that a lot of us operate in. It's not what I grew up in, and it's not what a lot of you deal with. And so we need to be realistic and provide solutions like ISOBUS that help you retrofit and upgrade the machinery that you have. Other things to be aware of, especially when it comes to ISOBUS, is Class 3 ISOBUS. Right? Class 3 ISOBUS is a sort of a greater level functionality that incorporates two-way communication between a tractor and an implement. Now, this started primarily was driven out of Europe, potato growers, a lot of large hay producers, operations and applications where the primary focus is the agronomic quality of the job being done. And so we have really jumped on board with this Class 3 ISOBUS and started to go in that direction because we can see the value. I'll give you another example for any of you familiar with a precision planting equipment or a precision planter, right? One of the things that we struggle with is plugging of seed tubes, any seeding equipment, right? If you have a downward facing seed tube, it can get plugged. And so one of the things that we're looking at incorporating is, what if all of a sudden I can hit a lower implement button, the machine takes off, lowers it, right? And all of a sudden, instead of relying on the quality and the experience of the operator, the implement and the tractor are smart enough to work with one another. The implement knows what it needs and can then communicate with the tractor. This is available today on a wide variety of the products that are available in the marketplace. And it's certainly something that as you progress and as you kind of move through this journey over the next however many years, make sure that you sort of keep these sort of solutions for the future in mind, right? Another one to be aware of is this ISOBUS AUX-N, or Auxiliary Control New. What this does is it allows you to utilize maybe a joystick or a multi-function handle like you see here in some of our newer tractors to control functions on a machine. So instead of having a bunch of switches or having to push buttons on a screen, all of a sudden we can take some of those machine functions and integrate them into the hardware that's already available. This is a really, really great thing moving forward. And I think the reason that this is going to be super beneficial is we know that tired operators and people that have to do a lot during the day tend to be less efficient the longer they work. And that's not a complex topic, that's not complicated. But what this ISOBUS AUX-N tends to do is it creates a more comfortable operating environment and more efficient operators. You know, and the biggest thing for us is the simplicity that Isobus brings. All of a sudden, there is not a planting tractor that has the planter monitor in it. We've got 2 or 3 different tractors. So if we do have a mechanical issue, or we have an operator preference issue, or whatever it may be, all of a sudden you can separate those 2 pieces and work them independently, right? If you have a tractor go down during seeding, having that, you know, controller have to get pulled out and everything else just takes a lot of that time and frustration away, right? Other things, it reduces the amount of cab clutter, and as I said before, it certainly increases the efficiency. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the importance of record keeping, because I think it's pretty plain to see, especially for this group. But as a manufacturer and as an industry, I think one of our biggest goals and biggest initiatives should be around making this as easy as possible. The industry and the world that we live in demands that our record keeping is no longer like this notebook that you see here. And again, this is certainly not a group that I need to promote that idea to, but making sure that we can have good quality, reproducible electronic records, regardless of the hardware that you have, is really important that you understand how to do that. If there's specific questions about our hardware, I'm more than happy to have, you know, separate discussions or whatever we need to do to support you. But, you know, for a long time, the pushback was always, well, you know, I just don't have the time to sit down and figure out how to do this. I don't have the time to figure out how to put all the different chemicals I spray into the sprayer monitor, right? And so I think it's for us, you know, one of the things that I've been promoting within our team is we need to teach you how to make time to save time. And that sounds disrespectful, I suppose, but it's not about, you know, trying to teach you how to do things. You're the experts, right? But it's how do we show you the tools and the techniques and the sort of the functionality that's already there in a lot of these displays to automate that record keeping, you know, process. I hate pictures like this. We use them all the time because I don't know, it looks like we're driving spaceships, right? I hate pictures like this. That's why I specifically chose it, because I hate it. The bottom line is, you know, there are some of you that are absolutely on the cutting edge of this. You are pushing us as an industry and as manufacturers, but there's a lot bigger segment of the market that is just getting started. And so we need to make sure to provide solutions and help you regardless of the step you're at in the process. Again, as has been said many times today, make sure when you find these solutions, regardless of what they are, make sure they're mobile friendly. I think you know, everyone today carries a mobile phone in their pocket, so we need to make sure that whatever solution you choose works well with that. The last thing that I'm going to touch on today is just sort of the latest from us. Last year, we introduced the most sort of recent iteration of AFS Connect. This has been a huge step forward for us, and we have seen a tremendous leap in the number of acres and the number of customers using this tool. It is 100% free. You can go to mycaseih.com today and sign up. And what you'll see over time is that MyCaseIH is going to grow to become a real hub and a place of great sort of information all year round for customers. You don't have to have a machine. You don't have to have a serial number. You don't have to have anything. You can go there and create an account today and start using some of the free data visualization, mapping, and record keeping tools. The other thing that this latest version of machines came out with is an upgraded suite of tools for our dealers to better support you. And so one of the things that's really important for us is making sure that we provide best-in-class service all the way along the process. Now, again, you've seen 100 examples of data visualization today, and there's no need to beat a dead horse. We all know that this is an important part. This is simply another option, and this is a place where, you know, if you do have Case IH machines, that obviously is an optimized solution, but can work with everyone all throughout. And as we said, is mobile friendly, has a tremendous amount of functionality. But I want to make sure that I finish on time. I don't want to run over. I guess, is there any questions anything I can answer for you? Anything I've confused you on, or are we happy there, guys?
You seem to have answered everything for them. And Andrew,
Brilliant.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much. Like I say, we just wanted to try and show you what we're up to, and if there's other questions, by all means, I'm going to stick around the rest of the day, and you've got my email, social media, wherever makes sense. Reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way we can.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, your details will be on the video here when it's put up online. So thanks again.
Thank you. Okay,
we're going to move on here to Angelica Suarez. Angelica's a research fellow up at the University of New England in the Applied Agricultural Remote Sensing Centre. And Angelica's going to chat to us about her work she's been doing on olives, the good oil on remote sensing for crop yield and management. Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so thank you for this invitation. So yeah, I'm going to share with you some of the results of the project. So just before, can we just see everything properly? All right, so the assessment of remote sensing technologies for measuring tree health, yield forecasting, oil accumulation and water stress was one of the main objectives of this project. Then we include here Albequina, Piqua, Frantoio, and Lexino. And we're working across different commercial groves located mainly in New South Wales and Victoria for this olive component. And the irrigation trials that I'm going to talk about later, they are mainly located in Victoria. So fieldwork activities, they are starting early in December all the way to June. And here we are collecting information about water stem potential, oil accumulation, flower covering, and yield as well. So the harvesting olives for research purposes is really challenging. It's time consuming, but the results are very promising. So that's the good side of things. So for crop variability, for this project, the imagery we need to test if it was possible to identify individual tree health and if the vigor zones were a useful indicator of variability in productivity. So here what you have in the middle is a vigor map derivative for WorldView 3, and the right one is the RGB. So WorldView 3 is a commercial satellite, currently the best one providing spatial resolution. And so we need to understand what was the aspect of the trees in the field. So here is an example of this is basically a dead tree and how the imagery or the vigor map could map it. And then the low vigor tree but healthy, it's basically all these area like in yellow or red areas. And then the medium vigor trees are represented by the green rectangle. The canopy, as you can see here, is a bit denser, but still there is a bit of gap between the trees. And now the high vigor trees that are completely dense canopy that are touching each other, the interrow space is quite small. And so in this vigor map, we use it as to locate the calibration trees. And I'm going to mention these calibration trees in the following slides as well. So because in these calibration trees, we were measuring yield and all the other variables to understand the relationship between canopy reflectance to yield. So having the spatial variability of yield gave us an understanding of the changes per vigor class and variety as well. So as you can see here, the variability is quite big across the classes. And the vigor trees produce more yield, but that didn't happen for fruit weight. So in the higher yielding trees, so say more fruit, a higher tons per hectare, they produce a smaller fruit size. And we check this with the grower, and they say it's pretty much what is expected. Because the low vigor trees, they put more resources to grow the fruit instead of producing a lot of fruits. So once we identify the spatial variability, then we need to move to the temporal one. And here you can see the massive differences between the seasons, and particularly for Pequal. So Pequal in 2020, I'm going to say Pequal in 2020, we've moved from 5,000 kilograms per hectare up to 25,000 kilograms per hectare. That is a massive changes. Again, it's what is actually commercially happening. And so it also occurred at the tree level. So here you have the 2020 trees, the calibrated trees that we use in comparison to the 2021. And it's a massive difference. So this is just showing that there is an alternate bearing process happening here, which is very common in tree crops. And so we have to incorporate now the spatial and the temporal variability so we can better develop the relationship between reflectance and yield. Now the forecasting block yield. This is again using the calibration trees across the grove. And then extrapolating that to the whole grove. The accuracies are extremely promising. As you can see here, for both seasons so far, they are nearly 100% accurate. And this is comparing our estimates from the remote sensing, from the WorldView 3 approach versus the commercial harvest. And we provide these numbers prior harvesting. So there's any bias there. Of course, there is still some questions that we are still trying to understand what happened, for example, in this block 2. But in general, the results are quite promising, and the growers and the industry, they really want to consider this approach for their adoption, basically. So the olive irrigation trial here, it was because when we were setting up this project, in conversation with the industry and with the growers, we were having these massive droughts, and they were quite concerned about how they can make better decisions in terms of water management. And not just only that, because in the market there are so many, in the market there are so many different technologies available, from ground-based sensors, but they are not very easy to use and for the growers to incorporate or to understand, perhaps in a very easy way and simplified way. So our idea here was to test which technology is better suited for this purpose. So we impose a water stress study, and we evaluate different technologies. So the trial is composed of 2 varieties, Arbequina and Pequal, and 3 treatments, control 75% and 50% across high and low vigor trees, because we had an understanding that the vigor tree responds differently based on the water deficits. So we test soil moisture sensors, dendrometers, subflow sensors, and weather data. And for remote sensing, we use calibrated daily imagery, that is a Planet Fusion that is providing daily imagery, and the thermal imagery, that is a Ceres airborne, that we match with the water stem readings every 2 weeks. And at the very end, we measure yield and oil accumulation, because it's not just to determine the water deficits, it's how much or what is the influence of a prolonged water deficit in the actual yields and the performance of the crop. That is basically the main answer for the grower. So this is just to show you how it looks like, the different the different sensors in the field. So just a bit of background here. The subflow sensors, they are just basically telling us if there is enough soil water for plant to draw on, and then the dendrometer is measuring the trunk expansion and contraction. And the soil moisture probe is measuring the volumetric water content at multiple depths. Basically, it's telling us if there is sufficient water for tree to transpire its potential evapotranspiration. So now from the results, this is still a work in progress. And James, he's been analyzing the cumulative water stress from the satellite, from the planet fusion. And as you can see here, the NDVI, just the NDVI, it's really good for, we are actually using this for monitoring the phenology of the crop, but it's not so much, it's not that good for discriminating between the treatments. So he found out that if we normalize the index based on the date where we start to impose the treatments, then we can start see massive differences, of really good differences here. So it is possible to map the cumulative water stress using this approach. Now, monitoring the instantaneous water stress from sensors, as I mentioned, we test many different sensors, but so far the dendrometer is the one that is the most responsive and perhaps is the most simple one to interpret. So what happened here, this is the control. And you can see how the trunk diameter is shrinking and expanding during the night and during the day. But it has the capacity during the night to come back to normal. So we can see the peaks quite, reaching the peaks quite at the same level. With a 75%, we are seeing similar performance, except that the trees are shrinking more, they are more stressed, they have less water, but still they have the capacity to come back to normal. And so, and that is telling us about the peak that again, around the same limit. But then the 50% treatment, the trees there are clearly having an issue. They are shrinking, but not, they really don't have the capacity to go back to normal. And so with thermal imagery, what we're doing is we're flying, this is an airborne flight, and this is an example of the temperature, and then the NDVI image over one grove. What we found is the higher vigor trees, they have lower temperature due to higher evapotranspiration, which cools the canopy. That is expected again. So the thermal is changing based on vigor and based as well on the variety. So we cannot just use the temperature as an indication of water stress. So the idea here is how the thermal imagery is changing per variety. And we need to normalize and take or remove that influence from the reading or for whatever index that we need to use for water deficit. So this index is a derivative or adjusted one that we are doing in this project, where we normalize the readings based on the NDVI. And now what we can see is that the index is changing mainly due to the water deficits and not so much about the canopy structure of the different varieties. We're testing this in 2022 because this is again like a test case scenario, and for the following season we're gonna see if we can actually do it and how well we can do it, what is the accuracy. And this one is the last one that we want to share with you. Is the national map of olive groves. Is an initiative that the center has with this bigger project. This is the information is now available in the Australian Olive Association webpage. So it's an industry body taking this as a adopting this kind of information. But we are also doing this for citrus, macadamias, avocados, and I'm missing one, and another one. The Australian tree crop map dashboard is there. There is the link if you want to go and explore. And we're working with the 5 different industries here for them to better use this and map the location of the growth. Right now, the accuracy is not the minimum mapping area is 1 hectare, and we're doing this across all Australia. I think that's it from here. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Angelica. Thanks very much. I've got a quick question for you. That alternate year bearing, that must make it very difficult to get a universal yield prediction model, though.
Yes, yeah, and that's why, well, now I didn't present it here, but it's one of the approaches that we're using is using historical yield and time series analysis, because we've seen that sort of approach, historical yields, are giving us enough information and enough understanding of that variability so we can better predict yield. But definitely it's not like in other crops, because the alternate bearing is this, you can have it every year on and off, but you can also have it randomly. And so it's even more, it's even more challenging to predict, but we're finding the way to do it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Angelica. Thanks for participating. Okay. The next talk we've got is Matthew Davey. He's a grower from Clinton Centre in South Australia. And Matthew and I are going to do a tag team here. I'm going to run his slides, and Matthew's going to talk for us. And Matthew's was awarded an award for excellence in technology, Matthew, wasn't it, from the Australian Farmer of the Year Awards? And Matthew's going to take us through his work on his farm. So let me get.
Well, I have to start off by saying the award for excellence in technology is probably more a team effort here on the farm. It involves more than just me, but unfortunately they had to put someone's name on the award, so mine was it. So I'll take it.
Very good.
So yeah, I farm here at Clinton Centre with my parents, my wife, and my brother. So, and this is basically the beginning of our precision ag journey. An old Chamberlain, Australian-built Chamberlain 4490 and a Hardy 4228. And back in the early 2000s, we saw the need for application control because stripe rust sprays we need to get over the paddocks more and more. We were having issues with double up of metribuzin in our lentils. So Dad thought, well, this tractor sprayer combination does what we need it to. We just want to upgrade the technology in it. So he went and visited 2 dealers in our local town and said what he wanted. The first one tried to sell him a new tractor and a new spray cart. Neither had the technology we were looking for. The second one said, I don't know if we can do that, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you. So it was pretty easy to decide which one we're going to go with, because that allowed us to fit new technology to our existing fleet. And that really became sort of still an issue today, is dealers don't know what they don't know, and they don't want to sell what they don't understand. So we've really had to work with our dealers to let them know that we are coming to them with the hard questions, not expecting them to know the answers. Just get back to us when you do find out the answer. And that's been an ongoing issue the whole time. But yeah, if we roll into the next one, this is now 2003. Dad saw the need to change our air seeder box. We bought a Howard Bagshaw electric drive, which was DGPS compatible, they said at the time, so capable of doing variable rate. Again, this is planning for the future, because we had no data that we could use to do any of this, but forethought, working out a direction that we wanted to take the farm and stepping towards it. So now we've got 2 tractors, hydraulic auto steer. This is using old KEE technology. So the old X15 screens. And so we had application control on our sprayer and on our seeder. And we were using HP corrections, I think, at the time. So if you move into the next one, we're now into 2004. We had the capabilities to do variable rate with our seeding, but now we needed a way of collecting data. So 2004, we spent $26,000 fitting an ag leader yield monitor to our 1991 case 1640. So, I mean, we did what we needed to get the technology. We couldn't afford or justify at the time just lashing out and buying all new gear. So so far we've just been adapting as we've been going along. We also managed to get our hands on a second-hand auto steer unit, another KEE hydraulic unit, and we fitted that to the machine ourselves. And so now we had the ability to get accurate data validating, so that we can generate P replacement maps, and we generated actually formulas in conjunction with our agronomists to, P replacement in our based off our yields. The other thing we did here in 2005 is the chaser bin is actually fitted with scales. So that way we have a way of checking our data, our yield data, as we're out in the paddock. And that's another way of validating to make sure that the data that we are recording is up to par. So that's the way we moved for. And immediately once we had the two technologies, we were able to move into broadacre seeding rate trials, because we believed at the time that we could reduce our seeding rates. And so we now had the capability to do it. We set strips out across the paddock, just sowed the paddock up and back like we would normally. And any time we got to one of those rates, those zones, it would change the rate. And we were able to drop seeding rates back by 25% at the time. And it paid for itself in the drought of 2006. We sowed wheat, our neighbour sowed wheat through the fence, same day, same soil types. At the end of the year, the yields were the same, but we were selling our wheat, was going straight off the header as APW H2 grade, easy to deliver. His was all going stock feed wheat, and he had to clean it to get it up to ASW because every plant in his paddock tried to set ahead. Whereas our wheat had tillered more, it got to a point where it realised it wasn't viable to support all the tillers. It started killing a tiller off to still produce good grain. So we're already moving in a direction that was making us money by doing it. So if we move on to the next one, we now needed accurate RTK basically in our tractors. We were sick of using HP. We had a lot of issues with trees. You'd go to spray a paddock, you'd drive under a tree going along the road, and you'd sit in the paddock for an hour. And that was just time wasted, not efficient. We started using a supplied RTK correction from a dealer, but we were having issues with their base stations not being surveyed in, and their radios that they were using were interfering with things in the tractor were interfering with the radio, so we weren't always getting it. So we managed to get our hands on a second-hand base station, again, somewhere out of New South Wales, I believe. And we actually started buying radios from eBay and importing them ourselves and setting up a network, because we figured we needed it for our own use. We could market it to farmers around us. So at the current point in time, we have 3 base stations. I think we have 4 repeater sites, but each one of those repeater sites may have more than one repeater, because we cover most of the Upper York Peninsula and some of the mid-north with that. Now that is sort of getting retired, and we now are moving in towards NTRIP, so modem internet-based corrections being supplied. And that's a lot easier to manage, because especially these days, most new equipment comes with a modem set up to do it. We are setting up hotspots in our own tractors for our own uses as well. So that is the direction that we are starting to move with our RTK network. We're also starting to have problems in the early 2010s with the X20s now that we're running in the tractors. We're still running Windows. That was the major downfall of them. Blue screen of death, touch screen issues were just causing us all sorts of problems. So in 2012, we bought a new Magnum tractor, and we got that fitted with a Trimble FM1000 screen, because that worked with a base station network. And we started switching our gear over to Field IQ. So now we've switched our same Hardy 4228, went to Field IQ. So now it's on its third controller. The same year, we actually bought a Marshall spreader that was Field IQ, variable rate compatible, because again, that was the direction we wanted to go, variable rate gypsum, urea, that sort of thing. And a year later, we managed to work with our dealer and we got a kit organized that we could put on our Horde Bagshaw air seeder. So now we had most of our implements were all Field IQ ready. We were running FM1000 screens, which meant they were capable with each other. And this really was a big turning point in our farm because the X20 was extremely powerful, but it was hard to get description maps into it and get application data out, because we run a lot of on-farm trials. And if we can't get the application data back out and put into our desktop software, you're never entirely sure where those trials are. And it makes it very hard harvest time when you're looking at yield maps. You're going, I think this is in that zone. I'm not sure. Did the operator forget to load the yield map, the application map, the variable rate map correctly? So now we started with the ability to bring it all back into the desktop and double check it all. So yeah, I think if we go on to the next one, in 2015, we had a pretty big change to our seeding setup. We decided that we wanted to go in the direction of liquids. And we wanted to make our box a toe behind, just for just to be able to see the bar better. So yeah, we priced around a few options. I remember talking to a Horde Bagshaw rep at Field Days, and he assured me that he could make me what I wanted cheaper than I could do it myself, and he was very, very wrong. We spent about 90,000 on the box itself, adding tanks. We bought a liquid systems main unit and spiker unit, so we now had the ability to put nitrogen out, ZMC trace element mix, and we also immediately started doing fungicide trials, especially because Syngenta's new product Uniform had just been officially released, and we managed to get our hands on some of it. And this yield map here is of 90 hectare paddock that we did trials of Uniform versus flutriafol at the time. And all year there was no visual difference at the paddock, and we thought, you beauty, we are going to save ourselves some money. We're not going to have to worry about Uniform. It doesn't do anything. But once we put the header into it and started looking at the yield map, it was pretty plain to see that Uniform was actually doing something to the roots and protecting the plant better. So it actually averaged about 750 kilos better in wheat than flutriafol. So that's not even over nothing. So quite often we talk to our agronomists or a range of agronomists about Uniform, and they say, oh, we've done small plot trials and we've never seen that sort of yield increase. But you only have to look at some of the zones, specifically up in the top left. You know, there's not a lot of difference between where the Uniform was put out versus flutriafol. If they'd picked a small to do their trial plots in that area, of course they wouldn't have seen a difference, where they're missing out on other parts of the paddock. So yeah, this really confirmed, you know, what we do now is pushing us more towards broadacre trials. I think this year we are currently running 15 broadacre trials across a variety of different things, different paddocks, replicating them. And so it's really important to bring that application data back in, because you couldn't remember where they all are and what they are. So if you flick to the next one, we also started experimenting with drones back in 2015. This is a farm that we had a lot of poor wash, like washed soil. It's real heavy clay, a lot of sodic soil. And we'd always really struggled with it. Drowning lentils, ryegrass loved it. So we needed to do something with the soil. So mid-year, we actually flew, just I think it was a Phantom 2 drone with a GoPro, and actually aerial shot photos. And fortunately, this farm had 23 stone heaps in it. So we're able to use the stone heaps to geolocate the pictures over the top of the paddock itself and you could see where we stitched the photos together, and you can quite clearly see the bare patches of the ground. We then we drew the management zones manually ourselves and numbered them from 1 to 5. So that way, 5 being the worst, 1 was just generally most of the paddock, and we variable rate gypsum out across that paddock, anywhere from 500 kilos for sulfur replacement up to 10 tonnes to the hectare in the wetter areas. And that has paid for itself specifically this year. It took a while to show up because we had a few dry years in a row after that. But this year we actually had lentils that were drowning, but nowhere on the scale of what we had seen here. There was only smaller areas that got missed that probably we should have spread more on, and we've now tweaked our management zones to include them. But you only have to look at some of the neighbouring fields, and they have large areas that have been severely impacted by too much moisture. So, and I think drones, like we're looking more ahead with drones. I think they're a good tool to be able to fly more often than not over all your paddocks just to see weed pressure. We've used NDVI to identify ryegrass areas, gone out and ground truth them, so we can again do similar to like Dan said. You can spray higher rates of chemicals across those areas. We've also had one year where we had lucent flea in a hollow that we missed because we kept driving around, and if we'd had the ability to fly the drone, it would have shown up then. So I think we're looking to where drones are going, is just getting the reliability and the cost and making sure we can get a return. Move on to the next one. This was 2018. We had the worst frost in 50 years, coupled with drought. And this really shows where nutrition started to pay off. This was a farm this was our first year doing it. We had just decided, we thought it may have been a little bit down. We'd put out more pea than we thought was necessary, but just to try and build it up. And you can see here on the top side, you can actually see where there's a green line running parallel to the north side of the paddock, and there's another one about halfway down running east-west. And they were old fence lines that we pulled out of this paddock. And through some of the frosted, the severe red areas, I was going from 500 kilos to 4 tonne back to 500 kilos again. And those fence lines were bare before we pulled the fences out, so there was no organic matter in them at all. It's just got down to nutrition. And after harvest, we started doing soil tests on some of these areas, and it proved what the yield map was showing. You can also see along the eastern side, there's a green strip that runs the length of the paddock up near the fence. That was actually 30 kilos of MAP spread out after the crop was up. It was left over in the cedar. Dad just went out and spread it out. It's the worst way you can apply pea, but because the farm was so deficient, it showed up. And I was out there reaping. I'd started on the western side, repped all the way across the paddock to the eastern side, and all of a sudden I hit this line. Like the crop didn't look really any different, but I hit this line, the yield jumped. And I had no idea what was going on because I didn't spread it. But I was able to get on my phone, pull up the application data that Dad had done. And I mean, it was one strip, but he still uploaded it onto the Trimble software we're using at the time. And I could pull it up while I was sitting there on my phone and say, this is what caused it. So that has definitely forced us to focus a lot more on our nutrition. And yeah, if you're a healthy plant, you're going to fight off obviously the cold a lot better. So yeah, if we move on to the next one. So this is a liquid inoculant setup. We in 2019 we had been using a lot of granular inoculant, but 3 weeks out from seeding, we got told we weren't going to be able to get any. We through one of our ag retailers, they said they could get hold of some freeze-dried Easy Riz inoculant, which you add with water, and we were able to either, I think, coat it on the seed, but we said, well, we've got the old Hardy now. We'd upgraded our other one, but we still had the Hardy with the Field IQ. We plugged it into the back of the air seeder, and we actually injected the liquid into the into the seed stream on the drop which is just after the coils. You can see it gets injected into the air line. You can actually see water coming out the seed boot at the back. And that has worked extremely well. It was another way, like just adapting technology to suit what we needed it to do. So yeah, I think if we move on to the next one, we've sort of now, the next one, we've now progressed everything over to Isobus again. So again, it was like Andrew Kissel was saying earlier, like we've now taken a lot of the screens, the harnesses out of our tractors. Means if our seeding tractor does break down in the middle of seeding, we can easily back another one up and go. Wasn't without issue. We did a lot of work with our dealer, and they got us a lot of the information, supplied us a lot of the gear, and we custom built all the harnessing for the equipment. Did a lot of yard tests, worked fine, pulled into the paddock, and it just fell apart. The liquids were turning off when they should have been turning on. The screen was just lagging so far behind. Yeah, it was a very frustrating seeding that first time. We did a lot of reporting with our dealer, and that was one thing they really, really liked. We replicated all the issues. We told the dealer how to replicate the issues, and then they forwarded it on to try and get help. Unfortunately, they couldn't, there was no fixes for it during seeding. We did manage to switch to the Pro 700 monitor, and we got seeding done, but that also wasn't without a few issues along the way as well. So yeah, but it does, Isobus has definitely helped us out because it allows us to swap tractors easily. Usually we have a Magnum on the sprayer, but it had an electrical issue. We still needed to go spraying. It took longer to hook up all the hydraulic hoses than it did to put the switch box in the cab and get going. So if we move on to the next one. This slide, yeah, it cost us a lot of money. We had a demo from our local New Holland dealer. They said, we'd love to bring out a header and compare it to your machine. I said, you're not going to compare a Class 9 machine to a 2388 that we were using at the time. So, but we would like to see the agronomic data out of it. So they said, yep, no worries, we'll bring it out. It's fantastic. Of course, high capacity machine, repped a lot. We weren't in a position to be buying a header. We just left it as it was. We just wanted the information to have a look at it. We got the yield data out of the machine at the end of the year. We were able to use our chaser bin and calibrate the scale, the yield monitor on that alongside our 2388, which we're running at the time. We ran them in the same field. And it was quite amazing to note after when we put it in the desktop software that the new machine repped nearly 500 kilos more wheat than our old machine. And we thought we had that set up extremely well. The other thing, just to make a quick note here, is if you are looking at your yield data, you need to play with the scales, because when we first loaded the two headers into the yield map, it did not look like this. You couldn't see a real yield difference. The software had basically smoothed it all out across the paddock. But when you started getting into the scale and adjusting it, that's when the differences started to show up. So based off this yield, we managed to, well, I extrapolated our data across however many acres we're doing at the time and generated some business case scenarios on dry, average and above average years, and took it to the bank and sat it in front of them and said, look, this is pretty much a repayment. The machine was basically paying for itself minus running costs, but just based on the extra grain that it was keeping in over our current machine. And it got to the point where the bank was like, well, you kind of be silly not to. So we went from not looking to buy a header, definitely thinking we weren't going to be buying a new header, to getting a new one. It's the first new header on our farm since 1976, and it's all been based off of the agronomic data we've been able to pull out of the precision ag side of it. The demonstrator also had a protein machine, which we have also got on ours. And this wheat that it was in was again on the same farm where it was lacking nutrition, was going ASW. So we bagged it all thinking that we're going to mix it with our H2 wheat and make more money from it. But in the end, I got a text message from a grain buyer chasing stock feed wheat in the mid-north. And because we had the scales on the chaser bin, we knew how many ton were in the bag, we knew the protein, I rang up and said, I'll sell you this whole bag, and away it went. So there's good benefits from the protein machine as well. So
Matthew, sorry, we might have to move along a bit. We're getting, it's all great information, but we might have to just.
No, well, that's, if you skip to the last one, that's the main point I wanted to get across there. But the just a couple of things to leave it with is start simple, do what you can. Like I think it's been reiterated a few times, your phone is an extremely powerful tool. Start geolocating your data, whether that's soil tests, paddock scouting, Dan was using it for rocks. Also read your operator's manuals. There's a lot of useful information in there. Get the most out of the tech that you currently already have, because I know a lot of farmers around us that don't know what their machines are capable of. So yeah, if you want to, that's the cheapest way to get the most out of your gear and start using the precision ag. It also helps you troubleshoot problems and gives you an understanding of the equipment you're using. Plan a direction, have a clear direction, and must be one that interests you and your farm, because otherwise you won't get a return out of it. You'll just be doing it for the sake of doing it. So, and do your research. That's important. And once you've done all that, work with your dealers, make it clear the direction that you want to go with them, and don't let them tell you it can't be done. I don't know how many times I've heard that from different dealers, because they don't understand it. They don't always want to support it. Make it clear that you don't expect them to always understand what you're asking them, but you just want help to get the information that we require. So they have access to a lot of resources. And as farmers, if we can develop that relationship with our dealers, we can help bring them forward as well, which is what we're looking to do. So, and take emotion out of any purchases. So like Andrew said, run multi-brand fleets, like get the best gear for your farm, not necessarily what your heart wants you to buy. So it's important to look at the agronomic data, because I believe we're in an age now where technology is going to start driving machinery purchases more than color and brand loyalty. So yeah, and have fun with it. Do what you can. So yeah, that's basically it. There's a lot to try and cram in. I know I skipped a fair bit, but yeah, it is what it is.
It was. It's great. It's fantastic information. We're going to have to get you on a Tonight Show, I think.
Yeah, I met Pip Courtney in Canberra for the awards, and she basically said, so don't get you started.
No, that's all great. Fantastic information. Thank you very much, and have a wander through. I wasn't able to watch the chat there, but that's great. Thanks very much for your contribution.
No worries.
The next up, we've got Andre Kalako from CSIRO. He's a research scientist there based in Adelaide, and he's going to talk to us about some work he's been doing on mapping wheat biomass with LiDAR, something really new, and he's going to link it to crop phenotyping. So Andre, thanks.
So can you see my screen all right, Brett?
Yep.
I think I need to swap it.
Yep.
Is it good?
Yep.
All right. So, well, thanks, Brett. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about, mapping of wheat biomass using a LiDAR sensor. So LiDAR is a technology that has been used a lot for crop phenotyping. And for instance, for breeding, for scanning plot trials, for instance. And in this study, we aim to demonstrate how we can use that technology in a precision ag scenario. And so we wanted to encourage people to think about this overlapping of technologies between digital phenotyping and precision ag, and how what are the things you need to keep your things you need to consider when shifting technologies from one space to the other. So just a brief introduction into what is LiDAR, in case people are not familiar with this. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. So these sensors are range sensors, and so they are measuring distance, the distance to a target. And they are not normally they're doing this in several directions to map the surroundings of the sensor. Obviously, that has lots of applications across a range of industries. And if you just do a quick internet search, you will find all these cool looking videos of how this sensor can map and digitize its surroundings. So obviously that has some potential for agriculture as well. And I started looking into this during my PhD when we were interested in using a LiDAR sensor to map an orange orchards. So we did lots of scanning and mapping with this sensor. So here's an example of a 3D map that we did across an orange grove, and we retrieved this quite detailed information of each at individual plants level. So you can have canopy volume and all and other characteristics of the plant. And obviously this has nice opportunities for precision ag, because as we know, things vary in space and time, and an orange grove is no different. So plants have different sizes, and we were able to map these. And obviously you can use this sort of information to guide variable rates applications. And I want to highlight as well that after a few years, there are now commercial sensors available. So this is an example of a commercial sensor called LeafSense that is doing precisely this sort of 3D mapping. So that was in horticulture. In agriculture, the focus has been quite different, and actually LiDAR has been investigated a lot for crop phenotyping and particularly to scan plots. So if you think of a scenario of breeding plot trials, you need to get information across lots of plots, and so there was obviously opportunity to make that process more automated. So there has been lots of different platforms, and what is being called high throughput digital crop phenotyping. So you're using digital sensors in these platforms to get as much information as you can. And obviously LiDAR is just only one of the sensors attached to these platforms. And one of the platforms that we got in touch with is the Field Explorer from the Australian Plant Phenomics facilities. And this is an interesting video because obviously this is not a plot trial. This is an actual paddock, an actual wheat paddock. And we were interested to see how we can make use of this fancy equipment in a real scenario. Obviously, we're not interested in the platform itself, but in the sensors that they carry. So that's precisely the focus of this presentation. And if you want to get more information on this study that I'm going to show you, there is this recent publication in the Remote Sensing Journal. In this case, we were interested in making use of the LiDAR system, the LiDAR sensor, the same one that is attached to those platforms, building those point clouds and actually mapping the entire paddock with that sensor for crop biomass. So in the same way that we're used to map any other variable in a precision ag scenario. I'll just run through these steps with you. So this was our scanning setup. Obviously not as fancy as those platforms that I just showed, but the sensor itself, it was the same from one of those platforms. We had a LiDAR sensor here, and there was an inertial measurement unit as well attached to it. So this is actually correcting the movements and the rotations of the sensor, so you have an accurate point cloud. And we also had these crop circle sensors alongside with it, just measuring NDVI and other indices, just as a means for comparing the results we had with the LiDAR. So we took this into a real paddock, a commercial wheat paddock in South Australia near Tarlee. This is Mark Branson's farm. This community knows him pretty well. So this is one of his paddocks in which we had a nitrogen trial, nitrogen strips there. So we had a nitrogen rich strip and a few plots where we had lower nitrogen applied just to stretch the variation that we were getting in this crop. This was crossing different zones in this paddock, and we also had sampling points scattered across the zones and strips in which we collected the biomass information, so we could calibrate our readings against that. So we hopefully you can see these thin lines going across the paddock. So this is where the LiDAR ran over. And just zooming in a bit, so you can see the thin strip where we had LiDAR measurements. This is a 2-meter wide strip with that point cloud being generated. And obviously we wanted to map this across the entire paddock afterwards. So this is obviously scanning the entire paddock generated a huge amount of data because we were still getting a pretty dense point cloud. And this is just a small bit of that point cloud showing the final products that we had. So we were able to distinguish between good and bad parts of that paddock. And this is the final product after lots of processing to classify these points into ground and canopy points and so on. And in here, you can even see the detail of where we collected a biomass sample here. So yeah, it was a pretty detailed information collected across the paddock. So once we processed the point cloud, we wanted to extract parameters that we could use to predict crop biomass. So in here we had a side view of that cloud and showing that we had the classification between canopy points and ground points. And we used the average height of each group to calculate height. So we didn't actually use the top of the canopy, but we actually used the average height because we thought this was going to be a bit more robust measurement. And we also had canopy cover, which is basically just the proportion of canopy points per unit area for the canopy points divided by the total amount of points. So that it was our canopy cover. So just showing some of those of the results that we had, starting with the NDVI and NDRE of the crop circle. These indices were correlated with both nitrogen concentration and biomass, and this is normally the case for these indices, that they are affected by both these things at the same time. When we looked at the LiDAR parameters, canopy covered had a similar behavior to the other indices, but canopy height actually gave us a good correlation with dry biomass. So we actually used crop heights to derive those our crop biomass map. So these are the maps that we generated afterwards. So this is the crop heights map transformed into a dry biomass map. And generally, I'm not going to get into the details here, but the general spatial trends were similar, but there were things that were particular to the biomass map. And overall, we thought that this was successful in showing the different. It made good sense for us, knowing that paddock, showing the different soil zones and the strips as well were pretty evident. So we thought that the whole process was gave us the result that we expected. So as some final considerations, we considered that using an adapted version of those phenotyping platforms, we were able to scan in a large scale scenario and produce a map of crop biomass. But we do have some counterpoints here that we need to keep in mind. First of all, we need a system that is fit for purpose. Obviously, that we don't have a commercial LiDAR system that is designed for this particular application. Remember that I showed you that sensor for orchards that has been designed for that, or even the phenotyping platforms were designed for that particular purpose. That's not the case for this for LiDAR for this purpose here. So we had to do quite a bit of customization from the data acquisition software to the processing and so on. We generated a pretty big data set, high density point clouds, which equates to a large amounts of data processing as well. So the question is, can we reduce the density of that point cloud and still get the same value out of this? I guess we should try to do that for this particular scenario. And what are the other solutions? Maybe there are cheaper and simpler solutions to deliver on biomass estimations as well. Maybe RGB cameras with machine vision can also deliver similar results. So just to wrap up, obviously I didn't show how this LiDAR scanning could be used for the actual application, because we have limited time, and actually this will be presented at the next agronomy conference. So just watch this space, kind of last slide. So we are presenting a framework to guide variable rate applications based on biomass and nitrogen sensing. So the basic idea is to follow a dilution, the dilution theory around biomass and nutrient concentration. There's a solid theory on this. So basically, the nitrogen concentration diminishes as the greater the biomass. So you can, if you know biomass, you can set a target nitrogen concentration for your management. So you can basically end up with a recommendation map like this. But I won't get into details to this one. But if you're interested, keep an eye on this paper as well. That's it from me, Brett. I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Andre. There's a statement here from Asher, and I think so the LiDARs these days can also maybe measure the infrared. You can actually get we're using an infrared sensor. You might be able to bring out some index. He's asking. Did you look into any of that at all in your work?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. There are LiDAR sensors that can do that. We didn't look into these. I guess there could be an issue certainly with price and costs, but that's a fair point, because we still, for this framework, for instance, we're still using crop reflectance as well to help us estimating nitrogen. So combining both worlds into one sensor is definitely one good idea. Yes.
I think I did see something about, I don't know, 10 or 12,000. What did that cost your one?
Yeah, it's on that range, but
Right.
again, that is just the sensor itself without any software following with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Andre. We'll keep moving to the end. Thanks for joining us today. So the final presentation we've got today is from Rowan Rainbow. And Rowan Rainbow's working here as a consultant advisor with Grain Producers Australia. And he's going to update us on, we've been hearing a lot about lots of information and a lot of data coming off machinery and how it's pushing, well, not pushing, it's leading us towards the idea of being able to automate a lot more of these things. And so Rowan is going to share with us his update on the code of practice for mobile agricultural machinery. Rowan.
Thanks very much, Brett. And it's great to be able to be part of the SPAA Symposium again. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. Look, with the many different hats I wear, one of them is actually to provide strategic advice to both the board and National Policy Council of Grain Producers Australia. And today I'm going to actually share with you some work we've been doing over the last 18 months around development of a code of practice for field machine autonomy. There's no surprise to anyone about the rate of adoption of GPS auto steer in this country. In fact, we've got one of the highest rates of adoption in the world, and certainly a very fast rate of adoption. But it's highlighted, I suppose, the interest and need for Australian agriculture to adopt new technologies and the value of that. And certainly autonomy is the next step. Just to give you a bit of a feeling for why we've got the driver to do this, certainly prior to COVID, there was some potential benefits. It's basically listing over $1 billion worth of value collectively, just in terms of value, in terms of pesticide application, crop nutrition management, and various labour saving technologies. But through COVID in the last 18 months, that both the need for labour in this country and also the challenges of people moving over borders just highlighted the immediate value that we could potentially deliver through autonomy on farm. There's no doubt that autonomy is going to deliver some increased production efficiency and reduce cost and wastage, but probably one of the big things that will ultimately do for us, it will actually enable us to develop new farming systems. And as we've seen with the evolution of auto steer, particularly the RTK 2 centimetre systems and controlled traffic, we've actually been able to adopt systems and practices which have actually led to production improvements and yield increases. Probably the other thing to consider too is that many of the tractors, we've talked about ISOBUS today, and many of the tractors sold in the last few years have systems to some extent which are capable of having autonomy equipment retrofitted to it, whether it be OEM or aftermarket, and maybe talk about the complexities of that afterwards. But essentially, we do actually have a market space in this country where recent model tractors, to some extent, are ready to become autonomous. And in fact, we became probably one of the first countries in the world to see a commercialisation of autonomy. This was Beefwood Farms, north of Moree. But in saying that, there were some challenges. Operating remotely from Europe to Australia was a challenge. Remote communications was a challenge. And also the ability of non-OEM systems to talk to the ISOBUS and deal with the firmware upgrades and these sorts of things certainly presented some challenges. But however, there's some very positive experiences with the adoption and practice of the technology on farm, which has given us some useful insight. We're certainly going to see some more small platform robots in this country, whether it be in broadacre or horticulture. And I think that we're going to see pretty rapid escalation of interest and use of these technologies in this country. And certainly Australia's at the forefront of this. There's no question about Australia's market ready for machine autonomy. COVID's accelerated that need. One of the challenges, I suppose, one of the drivers for development of this code of practice is there are actually very few regulatory barriers for autonomy on farm in Australia. There's no specific legislation, unlike Japan and France and Germany and perhaps California in the US. Certainly for the code of practice, the large-scale tractor autonomy has been probably the key priority or focus, essentially making the tractors that we have currently autonomous. We've actually developed this code of practice with the key partners. Grain Producers Australia has taken the lead on this, and certainly with support from the state farming organisations and farmer executive nationally. The Precision Ag Association, SPAA's, had a key role in this, and importantly, the tractor machinery manufacturers have had a important role in this as well, particularly the companies John Deere, CNH, AGCO, Kubota, and New Farm Croplands, and their staff, not just here in Australia, but internationally in the US and Europe, have had a lot of input into these discussions and development of the code itself. We've actually developed over the last 18 months completely remotely by Zoom, as has most of the world. I suppose probably the important thing to recognise is the code of practice is for in-field, on-farm operation only. We haven't designed it for use on-road use or public land, and essentially in those situations, equipment needs to be manually driven or towed. It also excludes UAVs, remote control systems, and fixed autonomous infrastructure such as irrigators and that sort of thing. Just to give you a bit of background, we developed the code of practice around a framework that's been developed for the mining industry in Western Australia. And in fact, the Western Australian government have given us considerable advice and guidance in terms of how to approach these discussions, particularly in terms of the types of things to recognise as needed under legislative provisions, and also how to align the code with the ISO standards for equipment as they're being developed and evolving, because they continue to evolve, and in some cases are still very much in a draft phase. It also aligns with the Growing Australian Grain code, which the grains industry has developed for some time. So we actually had 14 meetings from around the world, probably about 4 times that amount one-on-one over the period. It really has been a fantastic process to actually develop this, with considerable discussion around how we should approach things, and I suppose some fearless discussion about the best options about how we address particular risks. In addition to this, in parallel to this code of practice development, there was an independent technical review that Craig Bailey from the University of Southern Queensland and his team led, funded by Grains, Cotton and Sugar RDCs, to actually look globally at the regulatory frameworks, also the emerging technologies, and also consider whether the code that we've developed actually is fit for purpose with what we need here in this country. And I've put a QR code there in the corner if you want to take a quick photo of it. Otherwise, the link can be provided later, but we actually very grateful that that independent review is also undertaken. The code was also developed under the key legislative obligations, essentially under work health and safety. It was actually managed under the National Safe Work Australia framework. The state by state, it's a little different, so we actually had to take a national approach. That's how we've addressed that. Also the AgVet code, because there's no secret that this technology is going to be used to a considerable amount for pesticide application. The code itself is very much around on-farm implementation and practice, and it does actually align with the emerging ISO standards, and particularly the SEMA program team for ISO 18497 standards, and they're actually near sort of finalised for draft for consultation, and they'll be available late this year.
Rowan, you're muted.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep.
Yeah, terrific. I pressed the wrong button. Apologies for that. The topics of conversation were very much around operational hazard control management, and there's no surprise that that's a major part of the discussion. We did actually look at vehicle transport between fields, and there's a lot of feedback from stakeholders saying that they would have liked that part of the code. The challenge being is both the technology maturity and the ISO standards don't exist yet. So it's a very difficult component to bring under the code. So for the time being, it was agreed that in all situations they'd be manually driven or towed. But in the future, that could potentially be addressed, and this is a living document, so I'll look at that going forward. A considerable amount of discussion around pesticide application, and essentially the outcome of that is that the decision to spray or not to spray, based on given conditions, application setup and weather, is still a manual decision. At this point in time, there's just not enough sensor technology nor ISO standards to support automating that process. Maintenance and repair, a key part of that, obviously very dependent on sensor technologies. One interesting area is the one around fire management, and it's something we discussed later, in that actually removing somebody from the field actually does introduce some new risks to fire management that need to be addressed, and that's discussed and mentioned on the code of how to address it. And lastly, incident reporting and the protocols and who to report that to. I won't go through this in detail, but there's 11 parts to the code of practice and 7 appendices to that. And it goes into quite a bit of detail, but essentially we've provided some guidelines in the appendices, or checklists, if you like, of actually how to address it. And certainly going forward, we'll be looking at being able to develop that into induction programs. Grain Producers Australia is very much involved in training and development programs for industry, particularly the grains industry in this country, and to help sort of ease producers into that process and also support the commonality across the various machines. There'll be some components that will be developed into that. We did actually go out to industry consultation nationally through the state farming organisations, the companies themselves last year, and we took that feedback on board and made some changes. There's been a significant amount of manufacturer stakeholder engagement in the code of practice, and that's now been signed off by the TMA, and that's not only locally here but internationally. A significant amount of interest from the OSD Tractor Codes Technical Working Group in the code. In fact, I've spoken to that international panel 4 times. There's about 75 countries that are involved in that. Australia is actually not a signatory to it, but that's another discussion. And most recently, there's been significant interest in the UK and USA in the code of practice, and certainly in the UK, there's interest in using as a template for development something similar there. And the USA, through the American equipment manufacturers, actually sent the code out to 1,000 of their members across the US for comment and discussion. So finally, this is the last slide, but the code of practice is for in-field, on-farm operation only. Most recently, we've actually presented this to the WorkSafe Western Australian Commissioner. And in fact, we just in the last week got a letter from the Western Australian Minister of Industrial Relations, giving us a lot of encouragement around the outcome of what we've done. And shortly we'll hear formal feedback from the Commissioner in terms of endorsement or consideration of the code. We will review it within 12 to 18 months of wider scale commercialisation of autonomous equipment, particularly large scale tractors. But of course, the code of practice will evolve with new technology, and we'll need to continue addressing it as a living document. So that's all I have. I've left the QR code on the screen if you want to take a snapshot with your phone. Otherwise, I've actually put the link to the code actually in the chat section for everyone to click on. But that's it, Brett, and I'll leave you to questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ron. Let's see. It's exciting to see that's happening, Ron, that it's coming together very well. And so when do you think we're going to be able to engage it?
Well, a key step is getting at least one state government to endorse the code. And based on the mining industry experience, once that was endorsed by the West Australian government, that really was the enabler for broad-scale commercialisation. I suspect that we'll see something similar. So, hopefully we'll see sign-off in 2021. That's our hope, and we will work with the other states to see whether we can get broader endorsement across the country. But federation's a bit of a mixed bag these days, and different states have different views. So we're basically, in effect, starting west, working east, and we'll see how we go. We'll certainly, our hope is that we'll see commercialisation very soon after the first state endorses this being Western Australia. So we're very positive about it. There's been really positive feedback from the companies and through the TMA in terms of what's been done here. So
yeah, as you see today, everybody's ready to go, aren't they? So look, we're running over time. Well, we're running a bit longer than we were going to, maybe not over time. There's a lot of good information in here today. A lot of different industries we're working on still. A lot of different aspects inside those industries, all using data that's being supplied by the machinery manufacturers and remote sensing, a range of things, all to try and keep getting more precise in our management and digitizing the process. It's quite exciting. I think does anybody have any last minute questions? I'm monitoring the controls here and there doesn't seem to be any more questions. Everybody's details will be available on the recording of this symposium. So to get in contact, I encourage anybody who's interested in what was presented today to contact the presenters. I want to thank all the presenters for coming along and all the participants for coming. It's been it's nowhere near as good as being able to do this in real person, and the connectivity in between individuals is not nearly as strong, but it's still good to keep these things going. Frank, would you like to say something? Might have lost Frank.
Sorry, can you hear me okay, Brett?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just struggling to find the unmute button. Yeah, no, nothing more to add, but just to thank your wonderful self for convening today and organising the program. It's been a great one. It's awesome to see the research that's going on and the excellent grower presentations as well. It's great to see those stories and hear the journeys. And look, as you said, it's just not the same without seeing everyone in person and everyone in person and being able to have those catch ups. But hopefully next year we'll be able to travel again. And thanks again to yourself and to everyone for logging in, and to all our speakers as well. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and I think that it is good. The end of not the end of the journey, but the end of the research work and the work that the machinery manufacturers are doing is borne out in the farm presentations we saw today, where you can see the precision is building better businesses. And there's some great information there today about how things have been improving, and some good metrics there that we saw about how things have been improving. So all in all, another great expose of precision agriculture. So thank you all again for attending. Those of you who aren't members of SPAA, have a go at joining SPAA. And this video, as I said, will be up on the SPAA website and on our website for you to view or to share with other people. So again, thank you all for coming along. Thanks to the presenters again, and we'll see you somewhere, hopefully in person again.